Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is a walkthrough for Singularity. It will be played on the hard difficulty, and I will not be upgrading my character or my weapons. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen, because it's going to be quite an interesting 3 hours, which I have you for. As you'll notice from the footage that happened just then, I will be removing a lot of downtime, a lot of cutscenes, a lot of moments where the player is not in control and you don't need me to guide you through some elements. But everything else will be intact, and there will be a stipulation against healing as well. So in this game you are given healing packs very reminiscent of the ones that you might have seen in Bioshock, where at any given moment you can heal to kind of top yourself up so that you don't die. And I will not be using those. I'll be picking them up just in case, because I didn't know if this was going to be all that difficult or impossible. And instead, the only heals that I'm going to be able to do will come from the stim pack, not the health pack. So this will be a no health pack run as well. And the game is actually pretty good at giving you the stim packs in kind of creative corners and areas that you might not necessarily go to, and then having some of them strewn across the path in front of you. So you could do the whole game just using the stim packs and have a bit more of an escalated challenge, but nothing too severe. That being said, what I didn't know when I started making this was that the checkpoint, when you restart checkpoint, it fills your HP, which I think is incredibly good design, because it stops a player from essentially getting locked into a corner that they cannot get out of. And I wasn't aware that the game worked this way, and at the start I wasn't really dying on the early encounters. The first firefight against soldiers is actually really difficult and one of the toughest ones in the game. And on that one, I was really wondering if this was going to be doable, because I was kind of worried at first that it might escalate and get even crazier, but I can tell you, having beaten the full project now and commentating it for you, that it starts off tougher than it ends. By the end of the game there are some tricky moments and there are some enemies that put you down incredibly quickly, but fundamentally you're okay. And at this moment here, the game wants you to go towards that door that I just looked at, but I thought I'd experiment and see if you could do some stupid stuff. And it turns out you kind of can. It doesn't put pressure on you in this moment to get this sequence completed. So it lets you explore if you want to. There's no risk of dying. And I think that's kind of interesting considering how intense and crazy this moment is. And I am standing in fire. I'm literally standing in fire carrying a man to safety. And the game just is like, take your time, dog. Do what you want to do. And I appreciate a game that gives you the sense of spectacle, but doesn't force you and force your hand to perilously throw yourselves at the objective. And I'm going to be talking a lot in this walkthrough, guys, about Raven Software, who are the people that made this game. And I've actually made a balls deep to this game a couple of years back, and I didn't make a walkthrough at the time because I didn't really see the point. There was a lot of stuff to cover, there were different things happening on the channel, and I wanted to show Singularity because I think it's a great game, and I think it's a game that we just don't get anymore. But at the time, there was no place for it in my schedule. But now, I am begging for games like this, I am praying for games like this, I'm really just out of things that I'm passionate about, because the games that are getting released are not things that I think are even worth playing personally. So it puts us in a really difficult spot, and here we are now, a couple years later, playing Singularity again, and this time it will be a full run through, as we talk to this guy who might be important, and then it transitions us back to where we came from. And then we get to continue onwards now as Demichev replaces the statue of Stalin, which can always be a good thing. But you'll notice that the perspective just skewed then, guys. You see how it's kind of warped the image and it looks a little different than it did before, maybe a little bit quicker? That's because I used the widescreen fixer just then to adjust the FOV, because the FOV in this game is kind of narrow. And if you play on PC, you want to have a good FOV if you can, if you like that option, and I certainly do. So now the game's going to look a little different than it just did, but it's going to be tailored more to what I like to do. So, one of the great things about Singularity, which you're going to witness immediately, is that there is a wonderful sense of exploration, there is a great sense of moving through environments and being able to find resources and pieces of plot strewn across the landscape as we pick up the Centurion handgun, which looks kind of interesting, but I really don't like this gun. Not my favourite. You can get one-shot headshots with it, but it's kind of awkward to use. That being said, we're going to move forward here and get attacked by our first guy, and then we're going to shoot him and put him down. And if you see any choppiness in the game, guys, any stuttering, any weird moments where the smoothness just isn't there, it could be OBS having problems with the capture. But fundamentally, it's the game. If you see moments where it just kind of stutters a little bit and gets a little freaky, it's the way that older games run on newer hardware. And it can be an absolute nightmare to get it to a point where it feels as it needs to feel. And Singularity is actually pretty good for this, because it's 2009, 2010, isn't it, when this game came out? So the movement in this game is aged a lot better than a lot of games from this time, and there are a lot of mechanics that don't necessarily get in your way or frustrate you compared to more modern sensibilities, whereas some of the other games, I've got a project coming after this which came out in and around the same time, and that one is the complete polar opposite. That one's going to be really interesting, and hopefully you look forward to the surprise of it, because I don't think anybody knows what it is just yet. But there is another one of the emaciated dudes. You'll notice that if you do hit them right in the face, you get this wonderfully satisfying head pop. The problem is, it's not the easiest thing to do, because of factors of him moving and the aiming and the random spread on the gun. But the level design here is really reminiscent of BioShock for me, where it's this sense of a greater scale, but it's not quite overwhelmingly open world. It lets you get around, it gives you a sense of the environment, and you essentially get to explore as much as you want to explore. You don't have to, the game's not forcing it on you, but you will find ammunition, you will find med packs, you might find, upgrades and increments and things that can help you on your journey. But at the start here, it sets a really nice tone of atmosphere, setting, and exploration, and that is one of the greatest strengths of Singularity. As much as I would love the game to be nothing but combat so I could flex my inability to aim in this game, which I'll get into in a moment, it has this great sense of giving you narrative breadcrumbs that lead you to moments of calm that then erupt into moments of gunplay, and you can tell that this game has had areas of it where it probably was meant to be something different. You can tell that there was probably some rushing, some production woes that made the game a little bit limited in areas that it wasn't intentionally made to go. You can tell that there were a lot of threads that they couldn't follow up for whatever reason. And even in spite of all the shortcomings and the problems of the development cycle, they made a really, really good game here. They made a really, really good shooter. And it came out at a bad time in reality, because it came out at a time when a lot of people were really fatigued. And if you look at the game, you'll notice that it's definitely more sepia-toned and more earthy colours. And that was one of the plagues of the Xbox 360 first-person shooter landscape. It was just this strange pantheon of games that all looked... they had like the colour palette ambition of Quake, which is to say 30 shades of brown. And this game is very brown in many ways, and you might look at this and think, wow, it looks kind of drab, but if you can see past the intentionally muted colour palette, there is a lot of beauty here. There is a lot of art design and finesse as we pick up the Valkyrie, which, this is a really, really cool assault rifle. The only downside to this tool is that when you increase the FOV like I have, you can see that the model of the player character's arms aren't quite long enough to connect to the bottom of the screen, so I now have this like disembodied left arm, and I hope it doesn't bother anybody too much. I know there'll be somebody out there that OCD's going nuts right now, but there it is. There's one of the ramifications of bumping the FOV higher than the devs probably expected it to be at the time. But this gun is incredibly good. You could beat the whole game just with this gun. It is the workhorse of Singularity, and whenever I have this weapon in my hands, I feel very capable. It has good damage, it has good fire rate, and it has a good magazine, and you find ammo for it everywhere. So it's just a super good tool as Nolan North turns up here and gives us a little bit of intimidation factor for this next gunfight that's going to happen, where the boards on the windows break, the creatures come through, and we get the opportunity to try and take them out. But my aim in this game is going to be kind of garbage. And it's one of the weird things about PC where when you come back to certain games, it's really difficult to get your sensitivity. And this game doesn't even have... if you go to websites that compare sensitivity so you can get the exact, per inch, per dots, per centimeter measurement and pop that in, and you can get what it is in the game and then fix it in the config and everything, this game doesn't have any place on those sites, so it doesn't give you any kind of metrics. So I had to go old school with this one, ladies and gentlemen. So I was I was measuring the sensitivity in a bootleg way because I couldn't find the bloody tape measure. So instead, I know exactly what my 360 is meant to be. My 360, for the people that are wondering, is 3.0226 inches. So it's just over 3-inch 360, which equates to something like 7 centimeters when you convert it. It's just over 7 centimeters, and that's the circumference of what I want my character to do. So what I did in this game at the very beginning when you get the gun is I put my mouse at the edge of my mouse mat right in the corner, and I know because I've marked an area where that 3-inch 360 leads to, and I just drew my mouse along the line, the bottom line of the mouse mat, until it turned and stopped on the same point where I started, and then depending on how far I was off or under and over, I tweaked the sensitivity accordingly. And I got the sensitivity to a point where I could use it, even though it wasn't spot on, it wasn't exact. And, you know, you can't be perfect all the time, unfortunately, especially in these older PC games. And then I just kind of adjusted to it. And if you ever wonder when I'm playing, guys, if my aim looks a bit weird, looks a bit funny, looks a bit like I'm overshooting or undershooting, and I'm not getting on target as quick as I do on some other games you might have seen, it's purely because I'm not at my sensitivity. And one of the first things that you do if you want to get good at aiming on mouse and keyboard, guys, is you want to try and standardize your sensitivity in every game you play. Because if you do that, you will gift yourself the experience and the muscle memory that will transfer your skills between every game you play. And games are getting a lot better in that. They're getting a lot better at being able to give you that information and let you convert it quite quickly. And so are websites and facilities that let you do that as well. But this is an interesting sequence here with the shotgun. The shotgun in this game, I don't even like how it looks, I don't like how it feels. It's incredibly weak for what it is. Like, shotguns to me, when I'm this close to you with a shotgun, there should be nothing left. And it just, sometimes it's really, really good and it'll hit them from a long distance and put them down in one bullet, and other times it won't. The fortunate thing for the player in Singularity is that this game is really, really good when it comes to hit stun. So even at long range, if you shoot somebody with a shotgun, especially the soldiers, they'll flinch. And when they flinch, it gives you an opportunity to move forward and put them down. And in the grand scheme of the game, the shotgun is not bad. It's just not a good shotgun, and it's not a satisfying shotgun. But I will still be using it, because there are certain moments where if you get close enough, it's one of the best tools you can use for both hit stun and damage. I just wish it was a little bit more satisfying. And it's unfortunate, isn't it? Because the shotguns are impossible to balance. No matter what you do, someone's always going to be annoyed. And in single player games, it doesn't matter as much, because the only person that's going to be annoyed then is going to be the CPU. But fundamentally, you don't want your shotgun to be too strong, because then it trivializes the game. But you don't want it to be too weak, because then nobody uses it. Nobody wants to use it, you know? It's an interesting line to tread, and a lot of games get it wrong. One game that I particularly really enjoyed for it was Fear. The original Fear, the shotgun in that game was incredibly satisfying. But then in the sequels, it wasn't. So it just goes to show, even when a developer nails a shotgun, it doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to nail a shotgun. And it really makes you grateful when somebody gets it right. But keep moving through the courtyard. This is going to be the first platforming sequence of the game. And it's actually a pretty cool one. I like this navigation, because you move into this area and it's a big room. In any other game, when you see a room like this, you probably would think that it was going to be a boss fight. Probably some kind of big elite enemy was going to turn up, like a mech or an armoured guy. And it's just an exposition moment of tension, and you have to do some platforming and mantling and ladder climbing, and then at the end of this you get to progress. And it's an interesting both pacing technique and expectations technique, because it shows you that they're willing to give you the impression that something big is going to happen, but then they pull it back and then they let it just bleed out. And I'm going to say this a lot throughout these hours that we spend together here. I really think that the pacing in this game in many ways has got a lot more elegance to it than I ever really realised when I played it. And I've played this game a few times, but I came back having played, recent games, modern games, and been a little disenfranchised from modern games. And there were just areas of this game that I really appreciated. And don't get me wrong, there are times... This gun is really, really good, by the way. This gun reminds me of a game called Time Shift. where you essentially can give yourself, they call it time dilation, and it's bullet time for lack of a better term. It's a slow motion feature that lets you multiple headshot people, and it's really, really good for that. The Kazimov SNV is one of those guns where when you put this on, you can do some serious damage. And because of the way the spawns work in this game, you can be really lethal if you put yourself in the right place and you know what's about to happen. But look at this game as well. A beautiful looking game once you get by the colour palette of that generation. Like, there's that wonderful singularity happening in the sky, there's those cloud effects. The geometry and the resolution and several parts of the game are using my hardware to upscale themselves and bump themselves up and make them look really nice. The frame rate that it's running at is pretty good. Like, I can't complain on a lot of the technical sides when I was playing it. It did a really, really good job. I had to do some tweaking. It wasn't perfect. It definitely took a couple of additions and alterations for me to make it run as nice as you see it running here. But if you go to a website called PC Gaming Wiki, all of that is there that can help you do the things that I did to make it run well. And here is the first example of what I'm talking about, guys. Did you see that box on the shelf? That very obvious pick me up, I'm important. And then next to it there was a machine, I think it's called an augmenter. Well, these are the upgrades, guys. And what happens is every gun can get certain upgrades that make it considerably better. And then I think even your ability that you get in a couple of sequences later on, you can upgrade those too that make you better and more resilient, and your weapons more resilient and more violent and everything. And they take those cases that you find, and one of the things that happens in the game is you can pick the upgrades, but you don't necessarily have to equip them. And one of the first times I played this game, I did an upgrade run without realizing, because I thought when I was upgrading them that I was equipping them, and I actually didn't equip them. So I'd upgraded a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't until halfway through the game when I put them on. And it was a huge fail on my part and a bit of a brain fart. But it showed me that you can do that. You can actually run the game, no upgrades, and you'll be fine as long as you know what you're doing. So that was the reason why I added the stipulation. But the APC turns up here, guys. Use the time dilation to take some heads and do what you can. I don't know how the cooldown works on this rifle. I do know that if you do it too much, it just starts coming out of it and forcing you out of the scope. But this helicopter here turns up, and if you stand in front of him, he will shoot at you because he's about to let some abseiling lines down, and he wants to protect the people abseiling. But if you back up, you can slow down, and you can hit them as they come down the abseil line, and all you need to do with this gun is hit them in the body. You don't need to take their heads. One body shot from this rifle is strong enough to put them down. No upgrades. Incredibly good weapon. And what will happen here is the helicopter will move across to the right, and then you'll get standard spawns turning up, and there's a little bit of a standoff that goes on here. And you just want to move around and use this rifle. This rifle is superb. And if it gets too hectic, you can always sit in the back a little bit, and you can probably skip this entire sequence. You might not even have to engage them at all. But where's the fun in that, right? And I always kind of felt like this game could have done with an extra difficulty. And I was surprised when there wasn't one on PC. Because at this part in games, there was this trend of giving PC exclusive difficulties as almost like a consolation prize for them taking so long to get them on the machine. But this one doesn't have one. And I always felt like hard on this game, while it can be very difficult in close quarters. If you play it right with the generous checkpoints, it is a very manageable challenge and a very fun challenge too. But they could definitely have amped it and boosted it, especially considering that it gives you your life back, you know, when you mess up. And the checkpoints are generous in places you don't expect, and then they're not so good in other parts. There's one part of the game where I feel like the difficulty is a reflective of what it could have been if it had been less gracefully done. And that's when you see the face ticks, the stupid fucking ticks, man. These creatures are the worst. Those enemies, there's a sequence with those enemies. Every time you fight those enemies, it's a nightmare. And you just get absolutely destroyed by them. And if anything else in the game was as lethal as those guys, the only thing that's even close is the chain gun heavy guy. And he's only at the end of the game. But this is a really interesting sequence, I like this a lot. You're running away in this Crash Bandicoot moment right now as everything shoots at you, and every so often there's a stim pack on the ground just in case you get tagged too many times, which I think is a really interesting way of doing an on-rails like fleeing segment, because it means that you have to try to understand where to move, try not to take damage, and then know where the heals are to keep yourself alive. I thought that this was kind of a clever idea that you don't really see again in the game, and It reminds me of the notion of, in those sequences where you're on rails in a platformer and you have to pick up carrots or some kind of it's not even a word, speed fruit. Like, you know, the notion of hitting the boost pads to keep ahead of something, and if you don't, you die. It's that in a first-person shooter, which I really like. I think it's such an arcadey and gimmicky thing. And I like that too, just then. The ability to go up to the dumpster and open the slats on the dumpster and see what's inside it. Just those small interactions that really ground the world and make it more enjoyable. And then we move into a swimming section, which, once again, guys, I mentioned this game's pacing is very interesting in what it has you doing. And I don't know, I think everyone who's played Singularity kind of feels the same. It was one of those games that nobody talked about, that nobody really... It wasn't on anyone's tongue, and I don't really know why. I think Raven did such a good job, and in many ways, this was the last game that Raven made. And this is the part where the rather learned viewer says something along the lines of, oh, but they work on Call of Duty now. They've been working on Call of Duty campaigns for a while. They did the most recent Cold War campaign, which, as rushed and short and clearly half-assed as that development cycle was, I think Raven were probably the best part of that development cycle, and if they'd have had more time and better resources, that campaign could have been even better than it was. And it was actually pretty good for what it was. I enjoyed it. It had some different things in there. But this was the last time they were truly at the helm of something, and it was theirs to do with as they chose. And if you know Raven, they've come from some really interesting shooters. Most importantly to me, you know, the one that we all talk about, Soldier of Fortune, which is a game that will live on forever in many people's minds because it was such an evocative and violent game for its time. Got into a lot of controversy with that game. 36 different dismemberments or something crazy. It was legendary video game. And you can see a lot of that caliber and that DNA in this game and what they went on to do with Call of Duty. But we have the melee option coming up here, which is these interesting blue guys, these kind of contaminated people. They go into a phase where you can't hurt them, and they have this overriding jump attack, and they generally mob you in swarms. That's what makes them difficult. On their own, they're really easy to kite and really easy to manipulate, and I'm just going to get close to them and hit them with a shotgun. Problem is that, you see that? He's got this frame-perfect phase that stops me from putting the shell in him and putting him down, and it puts me in a corner, and this gets a little dangerous. You can see it as well. He phases the moment I press the trigger and then comes out the moment the bullets miss. That right there is some computer wizardry. Because can you imagine trying to time that as a human? It'd be very difficult to do. Very difficult, because you just don't know when someone's going to shoot, do you? But the CPU doesn't need to. They react to the button press, they input read, and then they continue. But I'm just going to stay on top of the spawn, see them move around, put them down. It's not too bad, this sequence. If you try to do this with a Centurion pistol and you'd never grab the shotgun, this part's actually really hard. I don't recommend that. I recommend going immediately for the shotgun. And then if you come over here to the dumpster, there's a stim pack to get your HP back, which is really, really cool. And once again, rewarding both exploration and immersion, because you're opening facets of the world. And this was a decade ago, and I was really hoping that video games now would be opening everything and there'd be all kinds of cool shit, but it just doesn't seem to go that way, does it? Same with the destructibility. When you look back at games from like 10, 15 years ago, where they had this eye for destruction, and a lot of it is superficial and cosmetic, but it was a step in the right direction of really feeling like you were impacting the world. And then now we have all this technology and all the heights of technology, and then we don't have those features. And it's funny because the physics have got better, the geometry's got better, the pipeline of development's got better, the machines have got more powerful, and instead we just don't develop like that anymore. And there's a part of it that I find really frustrating, because I know that we're capable of better, and I know that the industry can do better, and I'm waiting for that betterment to happen, and it's a slow development at the moment. Video games right now are in kind of a rough spell if you're not established. I've seen a lot of videos trying to get views on YouTube talking about gaming is dying. I've even said it myself in some controversial, emotional moments, and I don't think it's true. I don't even think it's close to true. I don't think video games are dying. I don't. I think they're in a dark place. I think video games are crashing. I don't think they're dying. And we've had a video game crash before where it kind of came to zero and had to reset itself. And I feel like we're moving closer towards one of those than we are the death of video games. Because the indie frontier is always going to have creative stuff happening in it. And I do think that we're a release away from somebody blowing our minds with some new innovation and some new genre and some new genre-defining feature. Like, all we're waiting on right now, ladies and gentlemen, is another Resident Evil 4, you know? That's what we're waiting for, another Call of Duty 4. Something that turns up and shifts the landscape, completely changes what we think about and affects the culture in such a way that we've got this brand new, amazing thing and everybody else takes from it and uses it. And this is a really interesting room. I would normally reset when stuff like this happens in a walkthrough and do it again, but I thought it was so goddamn charming and stupid and goofy that I kept it in so I could speak about it. So this room here has a bunch of cryostasis tubes that you can shoot, these cylinders, and they freeze the enemies and then you can shatter them. But they also freeze you. And it's just this hilarious, stupid Looney Tunes moments where you freeze the enemy, you freeze yourself, and then you kind of just recover, and they kind of just recover, and you get on with it like it didn't happen. It's such a strange touch, and it only occurs in like 2 or 3 parts of the game. But I'm really glad that it does, because it's character, you know? And you can pick those up later on with your telekinetic ability and shoot them at people and get a free freeze. Like, you can do all kinds of stuff with just the slightest touch, and all that is right there is a red barrel painted blue that now freezes instead of sets on fire and explodes. And it's such a small video game trope that they've took to their own meaning, and just by making it freeze the player but not kill the player, I think it's kind of endearing in a dumb way. And I think that's the best way to describe Singularity. It's this very apparent Bioshock-inspired first-person shooter that wants to tell a good story involving time and time manipulation. And it does, but it's also got all these wonderful, gimmicky, charming features that could have each been their own game, but instead of getting fully fleshed out and developed, they're kind of just present in small focuses, and a new one replaces it shortly afterwards. So you have this really strange buffet table of, what if this had been the central mechanic? But they're all mechanics, but they're just titillated around to keep you eager and keep you moving forward, and I think it's a really interesting way of doing it. And look at this as well, right here. We have some destruction on this scripted sequence when we get the TMD. And now, I have to go into the menus and change my bindings, but you didn't see that, luckily, because I edited it out. But now we have the ability to age things and unage things. And when you do this, it has different effects in the world. And immediately, as I was saying, we now have a mechanic that could be its own game. But they don't just rest on it. This one feature. This is one of many that you're going to be manipulating coming up. And the TMD is incredibly strong, but it also has these silly, almost innocuous uses where you can repair things in a room that don't really lead to anything. They just repair things to show you that it can be done. And it's such an interesting tool that leads to some really, really powerful setups. If you use this weapon a lot, you can completely trivialize several parts of the game, because it's very, very powerful, and it regenerates over time. And if you wanted to do an even more punishing run of this game, you could probably limit how much you use this particular tool, and here's an upgrade part that I'll be skipping. But the problem with that is, you can't melee now that you have this. So your up-close and personal strategies are all weapon-based. Because if you go to press the melee button, you can't knife anymore. You have to do this impulse hand where it just pushes a shockwave and has some serious knockback, which is really cool. But if you were limiting your manipulation device, you can't use it, you know? You'd just be using this for puzzles and nothing else. And there's a lot of puzzles that focus around using this tool, but they're all simple enough that they're a little bit of a brain tease when you're not used to doing it, but then when you realize what it is, you see how simple it is and how well implemented it is. And there's a wonderful clip of DSP just completely not understanding the concept of aging and de-aging things involving a box, and it takes him a good 20 minutes to do something that's very simple, and it's a beautiful piece of history on YouTube there if you want to check it out. But we're coming up now on the first hard fight of the game, which when you go through this portal here, you're going to be in a massive gunfight with a ton of dudes. And you cruise up onto this balcony, and there's a big meeting below you. And I don't know if you can shoot these guys and do anything about that, but I just kind of continue on. The door's going to get kicked through, someone's going to get shot off a balcony, and then there's going to be a bunch of the soldiers in this room, and we're going to try our best to peek around and hit them with a shotgun. Be really careful here though, guys. I died a couple times here. If you wait on this desk, you can use this for them to come around this corner, and you can kill about 2 or 3 of them in a nice line. But in this particular moment, you don't have any other tool but the shotgun. The shotgun and the TMD, which both of them are very, very good, but you've also not played the game at this point, so you're not warmed up, you're not in a Singularity mood, so you're not going to be able to just run around and blitz everybody unless you have, and then you'll be fine. But I went into this recording it kind of raw, which is something that I don't usually do, but I've beaten this game multiple times, and I do remember a lot of it. I get the general concept of it. I'm trying to hit this guy's shield here, but it didn't detect just then. Because if you age him, you can put him into a really bad spot. It's one of the best ways to deal with a shield, guys, that. And then now there's 1 or 2 more guys left. You've just got to be really careful, because I can't convey how quickly you die when your HP is as low as mine. You take 1 or 2 hits, and you're dead. And the enemies in this game, they're very accurate, they react very quickly. And it wouldn't surprise me if it was hit scan as well, because they hit you a lot in some interesting situations, so you've got to be super careful. But the good news is, if you do it correctly, and if you die, I should say, you will be able to get some of your HP back, so it shouldn't be too bad. But the door comes through here after the cutscene that I've trimmed out, and a couple more guys turn up, and I do take a hit just then. So I've got to be kind of careful on these next sequences. It's introducing the concept of refilling your energy. And once again, the Bioshock undertones here are overt, because that bar beneath your HP bar is your energy for the impulse device. And whenever you get to the bottom of that particular bar, he will do an animation, much like in Bioshock when they used to stab themselves with the Evo boosters and what have you. So be very careful trying to melee when you're close to an enemy, when your bar is low, because you might not melee, you might have to refill the weapon, and if you do that, you'll die. And it happened to me a bunch of times because I wasn't monitoring the resource, so just be careful. And then now we get the Seeker, which is one of the coolest weapons in the game. So this gun right here is a guided projectile that explodes. So you just go nuts and go ham, and it's really, really fun. And the weird thing here is controlling this on the mouse. Because the sensitivity in this game is a universal setting, you're not going to be able to fine-tune as many things as you perhaps would want. But you get used to it. But I was swiping my mouse like a lunatic doing this. But look how crazy this is. It's such a cool tool. It's definitely wearing the DNA of the Slayer rocket launcher from Perfect Dark. Another fantastic projectile that you could guide that exploded. However, this one is ludicrous because you get so much ammunition. And whenever they give you the Seeker in this game, it is essentially a Seeker sequence. Because they don't want you to do anything else. They want you to do this. And I appreciate that when you watch this, guys, it might not be the most interesting thing to watch as you see me guiding this bullet. Unless you're like a Sniper Elite fan, and then you might think that this is awesome. And it is awesome to do, but I suppose to watch it might be a little bit more boring. But I'm going to do it because it's one of the main draws of this game. It's one of the main pulls. And I only have a shotgun, and there's a lot of people in this room, so... But once again, guys, if you want to make this a bit more difficult, if you want to really get into this and do a huge project, feel free to don't use the Seeker. But I'm going to use it as much as I can because I love this gun. I think this gun is awesome. I really like its sight as well because it's like this ridiculous Galilean scope with all these calculations, and it doesn't make any sense to me. But it's just wonderful in its design because it's meant to be super sciencey. Like in those movies in the early 90s and late 90s where whenever they wanted to make something look futuristic, they just stuck 40 scopes on things. Here's somebody using a Desert Eagle with 4 scopes on it. He's in the future now. And that's how this scope makes me feel. It's kind of a wonderful little nod and wink to that. There goes that guy. Explosive to the chest as we keep on following the scientist dude. And proceed onwards. This game does so much good though. It's a really interesting title. And I hope... Ooh, curved that one. Damn, that got all 3 people too. That was a nice shot. What a fun weapon though. But it definitely wears its influences on its sleeve, because it's one of those games where, oh, I didn't get all three, I'm telling lies, they just hid conveniently and gave me delusions of grandeur. But I've got a shotgun, and the shotgun's flinch is its best feature, so use it. Just be real careful, because there's times when the enemies aren't accurate at all, and there's times when they're laser accurate. It's kind of weird, actually. I don't know if there's some kind of probability on accuracy, and if there is, that's a really cool idea. Because I like the idea of the enemies having a certain amount of delay or a certain probability of missing, you know? Every so often you can have somebody who's super on, and I don't think that that's an issue, but I don't really like first-person shooter campaigns where every single enemy is on the whole time. It just comes across as a little bit cheap. Cheap and easy, you know? It's like the S&K syndrome of, we'll make bosses that just cheat. And you have to have a measure of cheating in video games, because when you think about it, the CPU knows where you are the whole time. When they're doing something else, it's when their scripting has enough behavioural properties that they're pretending they don't know what you're doing, when in reality, at all moments, they know where you are. It's one of those reasons why, if you look at really old games, you can see them following you through the wall, you can see them shooting at you through the wall and stuff like that, and they just rotate and completely track with you perfectly because they know. And there's an expression that I've used several times on my channel and on my stream where I go, they know, because they do, you know? And it's funny when you see it, when you see the mist kind of settle and the dust settles and the mirrors and the smoke is not there anymore. So you see the noughts and the ones, and you notice that the enemy is not even hiding the fact that they're super hyper capable. And sometimes that can be really good and really effective. Other times it can be a pain in the ass. But there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood as well that you don't really notice that's helping you, and it's so interesting. But alas, take the rift back to 2010, and now we can continue through the research facility. We've got some bioformulas for blueprints. That's something else that enables you to upgrade your hero. So as you can see there, as it tells you, you can get a whole host of extra health additions that can make the game a bit easier. The game's kind of great for that. It's got a lot of things in it that can give a player an advantage and keep you in the fight. And the game is made really well too, so even if you don't use those features and you don't take advantages of them, you can still stay in that fight and still do quite well. And for the whole run, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 areas that were problem areas, and when I say problem areas, I might have had to do them 2 or 3 times. But the game could have been a lot meaner than that, if it chose to, but there's a really, really cool eye here of balance, and making sure that the player's having a good time. And I had a bit of an existential crisis here, because it technically says TMD upgrade, doesn't it? And it's like at the beginning of The Evil Within, where they make you sit in the chair, and it's like, hang on a second here, fellas, there's an achievement, right, for not upgrading, and yet you're making me upgrade? Do I have to do this? And then you have that moment of panic and despair, and you realise that you have to do it. And these are no different. So those machines, you have to sit in them because they give you moves that you need to complete the rest of the game. So the upgrades that I'm talking about are the ones that are driven by the player. That particular upgrade is driven by the developer. So it's now going to give us the ability to do something slightly different with the TMD. And you'll notice, right now, this is the kind of stuff in most walkthroughs that I make I would be removing. This is a bit of downtime, moving between anything where the player needs to do anything too drastic. But in this game, it's interestingly paced with some puzzles and some mechanics that they've just introduced you to. And this is one of them. The idea of aging and de-aging the box to use it as a platforming tool and to bring it with you, because that's kind of the idea. And this was the area where Phil had a lot of difficulties figuring this out, where you de-age it, put it under the gate, re-age it, and then it lifts the gate up. And it's a very simple and clever puzzle, and I like it a lot. And as we push forward, we get a little bit of foreshadowing there. That was me showcasing the telekinetic power that we've recently acquired, where you can grab resources with it. I'm not going to use it at all, guys, intentionally, because it's just not one of those things. But right there, again, it introduces another mechanic, another new gimmick for us to play with. When the Zeks, as they're called, go into the other plane, the different reality, we can use the impulse now to punch them back into our own realm, and then we can fuck them up. And we immediately get an encounter here with some of the zombies, and I'm going to wait for this guy and try and pop the barrel, but I find this gun really difficult to aim with. I hip fire it a lot because There's a lot of visual recoil on it. It's very nicely animated. And you feel like you put it on their heads and you just don't get headshots, so... I'm only really using it to try to showcase a little bit. There's the reload. That was the TMD reload. That's the thing that can get you killed, so be very careful when you need to do that. And then when we come down again, we've got more of these zombie dudes. But like, look at that. How did he live? Where do the pellets go? That's one of those really odd ones, that, where I put the crosshair on his head, and he's pretty close for shotgun in video game range. Because, of course, we all know, ladies and gentlemen, that a shotgun has never fired outside of around 3 yards in the entirety of shotguns being conceived as a ballistic weapon. In fact, I don't even know why we call a shotgun a gun, because it's essentially like limply throwing a pebble. They've never gone any further than that. Not even once. It's not like shotguns have incredible range, they just suffer from spread, depending on what the cartridges that you're using. Like, it's just so insane, isn't it, that shotguns have got this weird bullshit movie property that they don't have. And it's like when you watch movies now, you know, as you get older, and you watch movies with a much more knowledgeable eye, and you're watching dudes shoot guns that have 15-round magazines, and they're shooting them endlessly, and you're sitting there just thinking, what the fuck is going on here? Like, did nobody know this? Did everybody think guns were just magic? Is this a magic gun? Did I not know that this was a science fiction movie? The Godfather's a science fiction movie, right? But it's that kind of oddity, isn't it, where you start noticing things. Like when you notice the techniques that people use to fire guns. Like every time I watch Commando, I'm reminded of why everybody should have told him not to shoot things from the hip. But that's what they did in those days, you know? They shot everything from the hip, and apparently that was cool. That was what people wanted, and it's just really odd. It's odd to watch. You know, shooting shit from the hip that should never be hip-fired with perfect accuracy because you're the hero and the script demands it, but it's just not how that would work. And then you look into, like, my favourite one as of late is when you see, they'll be like, he's a member of the FBI Special Task Force, and he's using, like, an Israeli Uzi. Like, why would some guy who's from America, part of an American, Special Forces, doing work on American soil, carrying an Israeli-made, like, fucking Mossad tool, and you sat there just watching it like, why does he have an Uzi? Of all the things he could have, dude, he's got an Uzi. And it's like every movie in the 80s, everyone has Uzis. It's like they're a fringe American, like, rebellious Confederate flag corporation that want to destroy America and bring back the reigning terror of the South. They've all got Uzis. You sit there, don't you, just watching it like, why would they have a fucking Uzi, dude? Why wouldn't they have illegal modded Tech 9s? Why wouldn't they have AR-15s? Why has he got a fucking weapon he has to cross an ocean to find? There's no Google in the 80s. There's no fucking Amazon. I mean, there is one, but you'll probably die in it because it's a fucking river. Like, it's just so silly to me that, you know, when you notice things, don't you? You notice oddities. Like, there's a wonderful scene in Sicario, I don't know if you noticed it as well, where it's during the border crossing sequence, and there's the dude with the mustache, who's kind of like the deadpan badass, who's part of their task force. And he's sat in the car, where shit could go down at any moment, and he doesn't even have the bolt back on the gun correctly. So there's no round in it, there's no round chambered, you can see into the open bolt, and the gun is literally not capable of doing anything in that moment, because it's not prepared correctly. And it's meant to be a super tense standoff moment where at any moment he's going to have to, you know, be called to go into action. And you sit there looking at it like, why can I see an empty chamber? What? It's just so... It's interesting, isn't it, how things change when you have any kind of knowledge. And my knowledge is literally video games and movies, so it's not good knowledge, but I've come to understand to a certain point that there are ways that things have to be and there are ways that things have to seem, and it's like anything else, isn't it? You know, when you watch Heat, and you look at how Val Kilmer and Robert De Niro's crew are moving during the bank heist, and you realise that they got trained by people that have moved like that and done that and understand that kind of thing. And that's because they hired Special Forces people. I think the person that did the technical advisor on Heat for the weapons and for the movement and for the strategy was an ex-SAS guy. Like, and it shows, you know, when you watch them do that street sequence, when you watch them reload, That movie came out in 1995, and it's fucking amazing. It's amazing as a movie, but in that particular sequence, when you watch those people performing, doing that scene as a unit, trying to do a heist, they sell it perfectly, because they've had dozens, hundreds of hours practicing those motions, and it looks amazing. And it's the same reason why things like John Wick and everything look amazing, and The Raid looks amazing with the choreography, because they've had a lot of time to master it and get comfortable with it and sell it the best they can sell it, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And then you go back to these old movies where there's people with double-barrel shotguns shooting them multiple times. Dude shoots like 7 times with a double barrel. Like, what the fuck is he doing? Is he drawing on some kind of hex? Is he calling up hell to channel the Doom guy, and the Doom guy's passing him shells on the sly? Like, it's really funny. Really funny, actually. But I completely skipped over then talking about silly movies. There's a boss coming up, and he was foreshadowed just then. And he's kind of an interesting boss as well. A pretty dangerous boss when he wants to be, but as long as you stay on top of him, you won't see any of the danger. Because he's one of those... He has a fixed pattern, and I think you have to do it 2 times, and then on the 3rd time, they alternate it and mix it up. And the problem there is, if you're not healing like I am, and you're going with a little bit of low HP, if he hits you, you'll die. And I ended up getting mixed up by his final attack and dying, so he is lethal if you let him be, but fundamentally he should be okay. And now we get the brilliant sniper rifle back here, and I'm going to be swapping the Centurion out for it, because I just don't like that pistol. And we've got a little sequence with some soldiers. You can pick up the propane tank and fire it at them. There's a lot of explosives in this particular moment. One of the things I wanted to do on this walkthrough was to try to use my gun as much as possible, because it's just... When I do a first-person shooter, I like to do as much first-person shooting as I can, preferably. And I have a project coming up where there's a moment where you do something other than first-person shooting, and it really isn't that fun or that interesting to watch. And I'm actually going to trim those sequences out. And the irony is, one of those sequences is one of the most difficult parts of the game, but it's difficult because it's lame, you know? And you have to play really slow and really boring and really methodical, and if you don't, you just die. And when I'm making a walkthrough that everyone's going to use to a game that's super important, I would never trim something like that out, because people need that, you know? Look at the Uncharted videos on Brutal. There's parts of that game where, I mean, you die before you can even control your character, and it's just really miserable, and you've just got to grind it, and me making those videos has pushed a bunch of people to do it themselves, because they see me do it. I tell them it's dog shit and garbage, and it's nothing to do with skill, and they realise that it's possible, and they'll have a go, and they do it, and they see it for themselves. But they needed that push, they needed to see it, you know? And I love to be the person that gets to visualise victory to help those people achieve it themselves. But when it comes to a game that I'm going to be doing as more of a passion project and something silly to fill the void between video games, I'm not going to willfully suffer moments that I don't need to. Because that particular walkthrough is 3.5 hours long, and if I had those 2 moments in that I'm going to be trimming out, it would have been over 4 hours long. And I just don't want to sit and talk about a sequence I don't particularly like, because it's going to probably put me in a bit of a down tempo, and I'm probably just going to shit on the sequence, and it's not fair, because when I first did that moment, it was actually quite fun. It's just on further replays and on PC, it was nowhere near as fun, so it just goes to show, you know, sometimes the things that you enjoyed when you were younger aren't the things that you enjoy as you get older, and we all change, and I am not immune to that. But more looting here. Whenever you see those long, like, footlockers that you can repair and open, you should always do so, because they generally have that big green ammo pack in it, which gives you a nice amount of ammo back. Ammo in this game can get a little bit tight at times, especially if you're using something, you know, quite loosely like I do. I tend to overshoot, and I tend to, like, aggressively try to get clips and stuff, even though there's no real point to doing it, and even when you do it, all you do is waste your ammo. But it can be fun to make a catchy moment look even better, like a particular shootout look really sick if you hit everybody really quickly. And hopefully people appreciate that, as I try and jump on this box and jump on that ladder, but the physics are saying, nope, not today, son. But up we go. And like, look at this, it's essentially that sequence from Ninja Gaiden Black where you go into the warehouse and you do the platforming, and it's just a little bit of a palate cleanser before whatever happens next. And I think that these moments are so important, you know? They're really important, but the problem with the developers now, and this is a pre-boss fight too, so this is the boss, guys. So this room is littered with all kinds of resources to give you an advantage. He's going to jump around and, like, throw his girder at you. And I think you have to run up to the door to trigger him. There's going to be a crossfade coming up when he finally turns up. And the entire strategy is he's going to throw explosive barrels at you. You want to grab them with anti-gravity and throw them back. The problem here, though, is the detection on it can be a bit fucky. So you're going to see me get hit by a barrel as I look up and try and grab it, and it just doesn't work. So as long as you know that you can get screwed, you should be fine. And then when he's stunned, you have to shoot weak points on his body when you break the armor with the barrels. So this guy teleports around. There he is, wait for him to throw. Boom, grab it, throw it back at him. And then once you've done that, you'll see that there is this like glowing part of him that you can shoot once you break his chest piece. There he is again. Grab it, throw it back at him. And then I think maybe one more and we should be able to have a big crack at him. But it's all pretty simple shit. It's Mario, it's Bowser, and boom, there's his weak point. Shoot that. And that's all you do. Very simplistic. I'm going to use my slow motion sniper here to try and stack some damage on him. This is some of the most damage you can do in the game. Really, really powerful, this weapon. And then when he goes away, there's a bunch of the Zeks that are going to turn up, or whatever they were called. And they're going to bum rush you. If you stay by the door, you can kind of just hit them all. But I wanted to move around a little bit and try and track with them and catch them as they were falling down to make the footage a bit more interesting. But it turns out that the way that they spawn, there's not really much you can do to them. And they're already dead anyway. But here he is. I don't know his name. And now he's going to do some melee stuff. So if you walk up to him, you can bait him into a big overhead smash. And then you can shoot him right in the back. It's one of the reasons why shooter bosses are just not that great, because it's so easy to do. Like, you could alter this guy in some simple ways and make him a lot more of an interesting fight, but at this time in shooters, this is like as good as a boss fight can get in a shooter at this point, because they're all pretty trash. And I was listening to Hugo Martin on the Doom Eternal stream yesterday. He said that the Gladiator in Doom Eternal took 2 years to make. What a fucking waste, right? That boss is not good. It's like one of the best bosses in the game, and it still ain't good. Like, I like the Gladiator, but there's not that much to it. You know, I feel like the one area that Doom really struggles with is the boss fights. And I think some of the bosses in 2016 were better. Like, Doom Eternal's bosses, to me, if they're not just huge bullet sponges where you just run around doing the same combos on them until they inevitably die. You know, you've got the Gladiator that's got some interesting moments where you have to do certain things, and I quite like him for that, but I would never say he's the best boss. And it's so unfortunate too, because these boss fights obviously take a long time, they obviously take a lot of resources, and so that time it didn't grab it at all for some reason, and I took nearly half damage, potentially, or however much damage that was. But there we go, we put him down. That's the end of the boss. I just like the fact that he exists. You know, we've seen these Zeks everywhere being a nightmare, and now we see a bigger one, and it's just natural. It's a natural progression, it keeps you guessing. And now we get to move on to Borisov's Tower, as we pick up some E99, which is the resource that I believe enables you to upgrade yourself. So if you're wondering what that is, guys, that I'm not picking up and I'm avoiding and I'm not using, it all fuels your upgrades. But this is a cool sequence, because you're now going to be moving with the chick from Half-Life 2, and there's going to be a bunch of enemies attacking her. Look at that, that was close. And it's your job to kind of protect her, and it's a bit of a standoff. And one of the kind of douchey parts of this game that I'm not a big fan of is the death screen of the right now. Understand that in this era of shooters, every game has this. This is the fundamentally, like, archetypal, you are dying, please do something about it screen. And in the grand scheme of these screens, it's not the most obtrusive. But I do think on PC you should have the option to turn it off. And the reason I say that is because there's a life bar. When a game gives you a life bar, they don't have to give you all of this crazy screen effects to convey that you're dying. If you're a heads-up player and you're glancing to the top left every so often, like you should be, you know you're dying. You know you're not doing well, you know? You know you've got to do better. You don't have to be reminded with a repeating noise or a swelling visual. Some people like it, some people need it, but I just don't understand why we don't have the option to turn it off, because all it does to me is distract me. And I don't really want to be distracted when I'm trying to shoot monsters, you know? As I was saying though before I talked about the boss, the problem with the interstitial palette cleansing moments in games now is that they're too fucking long. Like, you just witnessed then I went to a sequence. I jumped over like a wall after... I moved a box. I climbed a box. I climbed a ladder. I got to the objective. It took my mind off what I did before. It took my mind off what I was doing next. And before I knew it, I was in a boss fight. And that to me is like the perfect length. It can be a little longer than that, but if you keep it short, you can give the player the choice if they want to explore and take their time, or you can give them the choice to do something really quickly. That is a choice that you no longer have in video games when it comes to these palette cleansing sections. Look at a game like Last of Us Part 2. Last of Us Part 2 has entire chapters dedicated to palette cleansing moments. They are literally forced walking, tedious zero gameplay, narrative being completely just bombarded by exposition from a character. And then when anything even remotely interesting starts to happen, it transitions to the next chapter, and the next chapter has gameplay in it. So you literally go gameplay, no gameplay, gameplay, no gameplay, gameplay, no gameplay. And every odd chapter is an interstitial, nonsensical chapter that doesn't need to exist, and you could probably skip it and if anything, have a better time with the game. And that's a problem. Because those moments, you're supposed to want those moments. Like, look at what's happening right now. This is a huge bombastic tower defense moment as I stop these people from climbing these walls by electrifying the fences. This is a really interesting, gimmicky, fun sequence, and I'm one hit away from death, so I have to make this work. It's a desperate final stand in the game, and we haven't done this yet, and we won't do this again. And that's where Singularity really nails pacing. It nails these moment-to-moment sequences that turn up, they're a delicacy, and then they know when to leave, and they know not to turn back up again. They're not that friend that knocks on your door every day, and you start hiding from the fucking door knock, hoping they go away, because it's like, you like that friend, but you don't want to hang around with them every single day, you know? It's been 5 days in a row, give me a break, goddammit. And that's what modern gaming gets wrong, a lot. And it's so obvious, and it's easy to see too. When you walk into an area in more recent games, you know immediately, oh, this is the arbitrary jumping section. And this arbitrary jumping section might be slightly longer than you wish it was. This is the arbitrary puzzle segment. This is the arbitrary walking and listening to dialogue moment, you know? And this game has those, don't get me wrong. This game has moments of those. But when this game came out, it wasn't as overt and as ubiquitous and as just completely played out and in need of just reshaping and reshuffling. Like, I can let a game off in 2010 for having these tropes because all games were moving towards that, but now they wear the signs on their forehead and it's the first thing you see. One of the things I really like about Singularity is that when you move into those sequences, you're not all that certain if there's going to be something kicking off. Like, you might have a puzzle where an enemy does turn up. You might have a jumping section where an enemy does turn up. Whereas nowadays, in a lot of these moments, you can almost set your watch, bet your life away, bet your mortgage to the fact that it's going to be rigid in its design. There's no dynamicism, is it? It's going to be puzzle, fight, jumping section, puzzle, fight, jumping section. It's not going to be jumping section while fighting. It's not going to be puzzle while fighting. And for better or for worse, because admittedly, who wants to solve puzzles while being attacked? It's probably tedious. And who wants to be attacked while they're platforming? Well, it'd be nice if they gave you the choice, you know, if they gave you a mixture so that you were never quite certain. And the issue arises when you are certain. When you're playing a game and you know what's going to happen before it happens and you've never played it before, the developer has failed to keep you on that path. They've failed to give you that thrill ride that you're looking for. Because you're reading it, you're reading every moment, and you're being correct. And speaking of moments, this is the hardest part of the game. This is the worst part of the game. This is one of the cheapest enemies in any game you'll ever play, and it's called a phase tick. And this is a sequence where you do a puzzle while being attacked by the cheapest enemy in the game. So you turn that lever to open a door, and it releases these creatures that run up to you and explode. So I'm going to put down this orb of slow motion here. I'm going to wait for the ticks to all run towards me, and then I'm going to fuck off around here and hope I don't instantly die. I don't have to tell you that these enemies are a nightmare, because if you've played this game, you already know. And they are really bad. And they're bad for a few reasons. They're bad because not only do they do ludicrous damage, they're bad for not only can you knock them away and it doesn't kill them and they still blow up, but additionally, they have a terrible hitbox. So if you try to shoot them, you can shoot them spot on with a minigun and they don't die. Imagine an enemy that is essentially a testicle with legs that explodes, that takes more than one round from a minigun. You just wouldn't believe it if I sold it you, would you? You think I was crazy? Well, welcome to phase ticks in Singularity. Fortunately for us, there's the player. The gameplay buffet of this title's presentation dictates that you don't see those ticks that often. But when you do, they're always cunts. And I'm kind of okay with that. I'm kind of okay knowing that there's going to be sequences where when these things turn up, I'm going to take a few cheap deaths. And here's the funny part, right? It doesn't matter what you're doing. You don't have to do a challenge run. You don't have to do any kind of crazy specification restrictions. These things are bad on every difficulty, probably. Like, just playing the hardest difficulty, normally with upgrades, this enemy is a nightmare. And it's its place. Its place is to be an agitator, and I think it does a good job with it. And as you can see right now, the expectations, the scripting, and the event is now shifting up. So now we've gone from, we've had that moment with that previous boss, we've had that last stand with the electricity, we've had that small detour of exposition, we've come down now, done some puzzle solving, we've been introduced to a new enemy while puzzle solving that's a nightmare, and now we're being introduced to the boss that it's foreshadowing in a couple of sequences from here. But before this happens, we're now going to be doing a sequence of fights with normal soldiers. So, recover after being dumped onto the ground, and then this room here is going to force you to get onto a lift. And this lift is going to carry you to the other area, and when it carries you to the other area, it's going to have a bunch of people to shoot. But before we do that, we go through this kind of interior sequence here that's got these husk of enemies that are sat around, and it builds atmosphere. Because once again, you don't know, am I going to be fighting? Am I just going to be exploring? Is there going to be a puzzle? Will there be soldiers? Will there be those ticks again that they've just introduced that they could have easily really gone ham-fisted with but chose not to? And look at this. Right now, you don't know what you're going to be doing. Because you're not certain. You see the ladder up there, and then your brain goes, oh, this might be a puzzle sequence. There might not be anything to fight here. But you weren't certain in that moment that that was how that was going to work out. And it's so easy now to see through all of this kind of scripting. As you come into the elevator and you do a nice... There's more exposition for the... I say elevator, it's a ventilation shaft. You'll have to excuse me, guys. I've reduced my caffeine intake and my brain doesn't work anymore. But we're back to more fans, more puzzles. Puzzles done. Here's some looting. And I just think that the dance here is very clever. It's a dance between all of its environments and all of its scenarios, and I think a lot of games could do to learn something from the pacing of Singularity, and the way it keeps you guessing, and the way it lulls you into the false sense of security and then smashes you with phase ticks. You know, and then you open a door, you come into here, this looks like it's probably going to be a fight, but you know it's not, because boom, Exposition Man turns up and there's a bit of narrative. But you see this area here, and this is the area with the lift that I mentioned. So you come in here, you get your motivator for what you're doing, you come down this ladder, and then boom, you have to fix the crane and it's all kicking off. It's good pacing. We've not shot at things for a while, especially anthropomorphized things. And now we have a helicopter, and now we have abseiling lines, and now we can spawn kill some guys coming down. But watch this, they have a weird... I think the model of the helicopter blocks the shots if you shoot these guys too soon. So you want to wait for them to get on the rope and get away from the bird, and then hit them. And you can spawn kill all of them as they turn up. And I love that design. I love the fact that they gave you the opportunity to know that that was happening and do something about it. Another feather in the cap of this game. And then here we have the amazing hit scan, impossible aim snipers. So these dudes, if they shoot and you're not lucky, you're dead. A lot of games at this time, late noughties as I think it's called, which just sounds horrendous for a word, doesn't it? It sounds like I'm talking about some cheeky movie that was made in the 80s that was some weird sequel to Porky's. But the snipers in games in this period were always really deadly. Snipers now in games, they have a really obnoxious laser. It takes them like 10 minutes to circulate the laser onto you, and if it touches you, you're dead, but you've killed them 400 times before they've done it. And I don't know which one I prefer, actually, because I'm not a big fan of snipers being too strong on the enemy team. Because I feel like a sniper's job is to punish you for being out of cover. His job is to punish you for being stupid, basically. The enemies that are in the fight with him, their job is to push you out of cover, his job is to kill you when you're out of cover. But then you look into other games, once again, Last of Us Part 2. Last of Us Part 2, so dedicated to rehashing parts from the first game, only doing them in a less interesting way because you don't care about the characters, and thus everything you do is pointless because they're ciphers for people you hate. There's a moment in that game where you are once again trying to get close to a sniper, and the sniper is a programmed death in many ways, and it's not even something that you can engage with because it's just programmed gunfire. And then at the end of that sequence you realise the programmed gunfire is coming from one of the only characters left in the game that you fucking care about. So why would you want to kill the sniper? Like, it's just stupid. And it's a really, really, really good lens on modern gaming. You know, we've officially got to the point where snipers in sequences where we're moving up on them are not even present, they don't have a hitbox. The entire thing is just scripted death if you move in the wrong place, so it's essentially a very linear sequences of places they want the player to move, and then at the end of it, the narrative payoff is, fuck you. Like, it's amazing, isn't it? It's really interesting, but here's a gunfight against normal soldiers, and I get to pull out my Valkyrie for once, which there's a lot of animations happening on that gun, and I really appreciate it. You can watch some footage of this game before it came out, where the guns looked a lot more modern day than futuristic, and then there must have been something that happened with the plot, or maybe they changed the direction, and then all of the guns looked kind of pseudo steampunk, where they've got weird mechanisms and cables and all kinds of different contraptions that are doing different things to give them some life. And it's another one of the influences right here. You can see with the perspective, you can see with this optic that I'm using, this reflex sight, that this is inspired by Call of Duty. Because you didn't really see the optics on the aim-down sights like that until that game took the world by storm, and then every game started to have them, you know? And it looks just like the red dot in Call of Duty 4, only it's got that different circle in the middle. And I really like them borrowing from that, and you can see it with the movement too. When you played Call of Duty, it had really, really nice movement, it felt really, really smooth, and of course the frame rate was really good too. And you can see them borrowing those elements here. You can tell that the team obviously enjoyed it. Oh, here's a spike shot, but I'm not going to use it, guys, because I died on this elevator. It's an interesting gun, that. Like, you barely get it. There's two guns in this game you barely get. The spike shot and that weird roly-poly explosive grenade launcher. There are two moments where the game gives you those, and then everything else is just kind of not present, and I don't really get that. Look at this grenade, by the way. That guy should be playing for a team. What a beast. This is actually pretty tricky too, because if you get unfortunate here and they hit you, there's nowhere to go. So this is one of those moments where you just have to kind of hope they don't hit you too much and stay on top of them. The big guy to watch out for is in that middle building over there. There's a sniper that turns up. He has to die. If you don't kill him, he'll end your run, that guy. He's really dangerous. But that's another interesting aspect of Singularity. They took the time to make all these weird and wacky weapons at a time when weird and wacky weapons were definitely falling out of favour, because everything was carry two guns. Carry two guns, super realistic, very slow, cover-based shooting, you know, go into this brown country and kill these brown people for these brown reasons. Like, it was all very established in that manner of military shooter bullshit kind of thing. And then you have this game coming out, and it gives you a gun called a spike shot that fires this crazy rail yard spike or whatever it is that probably pins people to walls that you have to charge, so it's kind of a bit of a skill cannon. And then unless you know all the secrets of the game and you can find all the secret weapon caches, you barely see that gun. You might see it one other place in the game maybe. And it's just really interesting to me that they would make a gun that is unique and more interesting than most guns in most shooters at this moment in history, and then never give it you. But look at what it does. It makes the sequences where it does turn up feel more memorable because they give you something you don't often see. And it's super clever. They've essentially turned a sequence, which is This is not a bad sequence. I remember this sequence because I'm always very nervous about getting on the lift because I know there's no cover and I know I can't back up. And even though that sequence is never that difficult, you remember moments like that in games from when you first played them because your brain is looking at it through a video game lens. And that video game lens is telling you this could be dangerous, this could be awkward, be careful of this, be careful of that. And the level of your experience of how many years you've put into playing them has taught you so many lessons that you're listening to without realizing you're listening to them. And I find a lot of the times that when I play old games that I've played before, I remember how I felt when I first played them, and I remember the trepidations of thinking, oh, this could be a difficult sequence, this could be a difficult sequence, this could be tough, this could be rough, this could be this, there could be that, right? And then when I come back and play them, I get debated by my own nostalgia. It's really strange. So I'll remember a sequence and I'll go, oh, hang on a second, I remember this. And if I remember this, it's probably going to be quite bad. There's probably going to be something that's not quite right. As we get introduced to a new enemy here, which is a nice little tease. I think he's meant to hit you then, but you can stop him from hitting you, which is nice design. I think this is an enemy that was perhaps inspired by the assassin from Fear. I don't know for certain, and I don't want to assert that that's true, but that's what this enemy reminds me of. It's an enemy that kind of harks to the horror, and he kind of tries to ambush you from interesting positions and then gets very aggressive physically. And if you don't know what the assassins are in Fear, shame on you, and you should totally play Fear. But I don't blame you if you haven't played it, because it's one of those games that has not been put into a better or more digestible format yet, and I don't know why, because it's quite old now. And it's quite difficult to get it to run correctly on modern software, which is one of the worst parts about playing older games. They just don't work well on new machines. It's really funny, but it's just the way it is, you know. They were built to work on certain setups, and our setups are nothing like what they used to be, so there's problems. As we do a bit more puzzle solving here, and it's really clever what they've done there. They've essentially introduced this new enemy that ambushed you from being invisible, and then they've made you do some puzzle solving with fear of him turning up, but he's never going to turn up because it's just puzzle solving in that moment. And then when you fall into this room, there's this narrative segment, and he's going to attack you here. And that's why they've given you the ice, because when he turns up you can freeze him with the cylinder. And then when you freeze him you just want to hit him with your hardest gun, which I think for me right now is my Kazanov sniper rifle. But there's a bit of exposition here teaching us some things, and you're going to hear the pulse as he turns up. And of course, if you freeze yourself like I do, because I'm stupid, you're going to have to use the impulse to break the frost. But just... He teleports as well when you freeze him, but he keeps the frozen state, so just be careful. Like, you can beat this guy without taking damage if you want to. You could restart and everything, but I think you have to watch the cutscene every time, and I just wasn't that interested in that, so instead I'll take the hit. Like, I could have made this walkthrough a lot cleaner if I wanted to, but that's not what I'm going for with this one. This one's meant to be more of a appreciation of Singularity and an opportunity to put something on the channel with it. But there he goes, there's a checkpoint. We popped him down. You do not see that enemy that often, and they never throw that enemy at you when other enemies are around. And I think that that's a mistake. I think it's an interesting eye for balance, and they've obviously really looked into the fairness of their game, and they wanted the fights to feel very, very unique and very fair and balanced. But I feel like the game would have benefited from moments where those guys turned up with something else just to put some extra pressure on you. Because to look at it with a more modern perspective here, he could be the Marauder, you know. He's obviously nowhere near as complicated, nowhere near as difficult, but he is a dickhead, and a lot of people don't like the Marauder, and I would imagine that if he came out in 2021, a lot of people wouldn't like him, because he just puts pressure on you, and imagine other things putting pressure on you while he's putting pressure on you. It could have been really interesting. It could have been multitasking and managing, you know, different levels of threat. But then the game never wants to do that. That's not the goal of the game. They're a fun adventure first, with fun combat puzzles, not necessarily highly demanding, highly skillful, and highly difficult puzzles. And that's fine, that's okay, you know? Not everything has to be hard. Not everything has to be like a NES game, where it destroys you so mercilessly you'll never go back and play them because they remind you of pure punishment and brutality. But open the gate there, you get attacked by some Zeks. Feel free to use your impulse to push them down because it looks amazing, and then hit them on the ground. You'll notice that I'm not aging the Zeks as well. You can do some manipulation with them. It was my intention to only really use the time powers for the melee, more so than anything else. The only reason I use the time ball to stop the phase ticks is because it's one of the best ways of doing that room. And I didn't want to be there longer than I needed to be. And I can happily report that I got it on my second attempt. And I remember the last time I played this game when I made the balls deep, which is about 3 years ago. I was on that sequence when I played the game again for a decent amount of time because it's fucking a nightmare. And then this corridor here, guys, if you crouch, you can skip all these enemies. These enemies only react to you firing your gun. But once again, where is the fun in skipping the fights, you know? So what I wanted to do for this first one is I wanted to shoot them. And then at the end of it, I waste all my ammunition and realise why shooting them is not what the developers want you to do. And then so some of the sequences afterwards, I'm going to choose not to do that. But here we go again, guys. Look at this. We're moving forward in the game. We're moving into a sewer. They could have used Zeks. They could have used those zombie guys. But instead, they've got these bloated, like, radioactive, weird, time-manipulated zombie dudes that have different properties, that are blind and work off of sound and are incredibly durable when you hit them. This is one of the toughest enemies in the game, this, because it can take a headshot from the Kazanov. But they really do burn your ammunition, so I don't recommend doing this. And then those little tripwires there, guys, that you've seen me shoot, of course, if you touch those, they blow up. Does a lot of damage. You're going to have a bad time. But you can absolutely just avoid these dudes. And I love that they give you the choice, because the moment you start shooting, they all react. And then it gets a bit hairy. But it's a lot of fun. And I like the fact that they've just introduced this. We're an hour now into the game. Admittedly, I've trimmed out a lot of sequences, so you've probably been playing for a bit longer. And they're continually trying to establish new things. New enemy type. We've got a new environmental hazard/puzzle tool that's very simple. Just change the time on the route, it moves a pipe, you know? It's the subtle small things using what you already have in unique ways. And I like this game a lot for it. And I do think that it's kind of one of those B-tier games that has a lot of A-tier class in it. There's a lot of really cool moments as well. It reminds me of what Monolith do in their shooters, where there are just moments of real charm. And Raven are no different, you know. They've got a lot of chops, they've got a lot of experience, and I think they did a great job with this one. And there's a wonderful moment here. If you come over here, you can turn the electricity on and electrocute those tanky enemies. If you shoot those guys, they all bum rush you and it gets quite challenging. But you don't need to, because there's this extra layer to it that just... It's a small touch, they're not reinventing the wheel, you know? But it's welcome. And I come back to it and I kind of go, oh, that's cool. Because I play games now where there's almost nothing cool in them. The whole thing is like some fucking exposition dump, garbage, slow walking, nothing happening, never getting to shoot my gun, never getting to play the game. You know, like look at Modern Warfare 2019. Let's go clear a house where you spend most of it slowly walking upstairs as they try and build tension that doesn't exist because all you want to do is shoot your fucking gun! I don't want to watch Price do cool things. I want to be Price doing cool things. When did we become so, like, second best to this nonsensical design that's not good? Like, is it for these people that want to be good at games but don't have the acumen to do so or the ability, so they have to feel empowered by watching someone else do it? Is that what Twitch has bred? It doesn't make sense. It's like this weird symbiotic relation. It's this surrogacy of ability, and I don't understand it. I want to do the good things. I don't want to watch somebody do the good things. Like, I play a game to be the hero, not to watch the fucking hero. But this is what you can do with these enemies. Look how well designed they are. As soon as you crouch, you can just walk around them, completely neutralizing what makes them dangerous. In a first-person shooter of all games. And this is not a stealth shooter. This is a shooter where you're meant to shoot your gun. And it's super cool. I need to de-age the route, and then it'll let me grab this boy and push him through. But just simple things like this. Platforming with this enemy that reacts to sound, you know, it's cool. But now I've got no bullets because I shot them all. There's an upgrade piece. See how nervous I am there, guys, because I don't want to get killed when I've got no bullets. So the first thing I do is melee on reaction. But it doesn't matter because it's just like a bit of an atmosphere moment. And I'd just like to mention too that it might seem like I'm praising this game for the smallest things, but it's kind of surprising how much the small things mean to you when you haven't seen them for a while. Like I spend every day, guys, looking forward to new games with new horizons and new mechanics and new opportunities and new creative frontiers, and they never come. Like, I wake up every day hoping to cover something that changes the gaming landscape and reminds me of the games that I hold so dear and what they did when they came out. But they just never turn up, you know? And it can really get to you and really bum you out. And you look back, you go back to these simpler times, and you play these games that when they came out at the time, you were a little disenfranchised, you were a little bit bummed out on the genre. Like, when this game came out, first-person shooters had been driven into the ground. On the Xbox 360, all it was first-person shooters. It was a tirade of first-person shooters, and they were all the same. This gimmick that way, that gimmick this way, this weapon, that weapon. Like, there were so many things, and it was all gimmicky, it was all brown, it was all... Everything was a first-person shooter because they made so much money, they were so popular, and it was the boom of first-person shooters. Now, we don't really get first-person shooters. The shooters we get now are the sequels and the franchises that are already established, and you've already played them so much that you've played the new one without even buying it. Or it's Battle Royale, which I'm not interested in personally. So, right now, I would kill for shooters the way that these shooters came out, because even the bad ones had redeeming qualities and had things that made them fun, you know? And it would be something that I could cover on the channel, because I'm really, really enjoying playing first-person shooters on PC. There's just something about it that is really, really enjoyable to me. And it's just not here, you know? So when I come back to a game like this, a game that I previously played, guys, when games were coming out and there were interesting things to cover and there were things that were inspiring me, and I didn't think that this was worth a walkthrough. I didn't think there was anything I could really do because I didn't need to, you know? And then right now we're in such a creative drought. Unless you play indie games, unless you look for the more eclectic stuff where they're doing great things. There's always great things somewhere, you just have to find them. And I've just been busting a lot recently and gambling on the wrong horses, sorry. So when I come back to something like this and I play it, it's those small smiles and those small smirks where I remember just like, oh yeah, that's cool. Ooh, speaking of cool, this is a huge firefight on a staircase it's like a square-shaped staircase that goes upwards, and there's about 4 or 5 different tiers to it, and it's all on one checkpoint too, and I do it on a first attempt, which I didn't expect, but it's incredibly tense and really fun. And it's, once again, pacing, guys. We've got some environmental exploration, we've got some tension, we've got this new enemy, we've got some looting, and now we've got a big firefight coming up. They're ticking the right boxes, and it really makes me wish Raven could do more things. I miss the fact that they've not really done anything except for work second fiddle to Call of Duty for the last 10 years, you know? I miss this tier of game where we got these games. And here he is, here it goes. As soon as I shoot my gun here, it's kicking off. And I'm going to use as much cover as I can, because this is... The spawns here are always as you progress upwards. So as you move forward, you wait to see movement, and as soon as you see movement, you deal with it or you die. It's a pretty cool sequence. And look at this animation. The guy's trying to crawl away. He's actually dying. He's dead. He's not going to do anything, but he's still moving. He's still, you know, trying to do what he's doing, and you can put him down. It's just the small touches like that. That's love, that, guys. It's grisly, very violent, but that's love that your game has that. That's that Turok 2 dismemberment right there. So we get some crazy micro stutters, which I hope aren't on the full video. I hope that's just Premiere being weird. But slowly but surely, I'm going to be circling around this zone, using as much chest-eye cover as I can to just head glitch and decimate the moment I see movement. And at this part, I've been playing the game now for an hour or two, so my hand has got used to the weird mouse, the weird sense. So I should be pretty lethal here. I should be capable enough to deal with what's coming. Isn't it interesting that we didn't see this on the other systems, you know? There was no Singularity 2. There's a really weird forced multiplayer in this that I don't recommend. But like, this could be a really, really cool game to go back to and do one of those remasters that people like to do, where they just bring it out on all the new systems, they upscale it, they give us some behind the scenes or something, a new achievement and trophy list for it, and boom, you've got a game that's on a new system now, and everybody gets to remember that Singularity was pretty cool. But a couple of other games at the time probably stole its thunder. Because I haven't even talked about the Bioshock influence, and I feel like it's so obvious. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Can you imagine, guys? Can you imagine a world where we got way more games inspired by Bioshock than we did? And essentially Bioshock is just System Shock, isn't it? System Shock made by practically the same guys in a different place. It's just an extension on what they built, those early ideas. But the idea of having a life bar that doesn't automatically regenerate in the era of regenerating life is unique, again. Having an ability bar to have some kind of gameplay hook that doesn't regenerate unless expressly stated, you know? Having a game where the emphasis is on trying to establish an interesting and unique world to navigate, but at the same time, it has looting aspects, it has horror aspects, it has platforming aspects, puzzle solving, combat, and it's all very organically and naturally flowing together like a weave of good ideas. And that's the problem, isn't it? You know, especially when you play a lot of games. Like, I've played a lot of games, you've played a lot of games, you know. We've all played so many games now that we can spot exactly what we're doing the moment it starts. Oh, is this a turret section? This looks like a turret section. Oh, this is a big room. Is this a boss fight? Is this a big fight? You know? Oh, wow, he's giving me tons of armor and tons of ammo for my best guns. I wonder what's going to happen next. You know? Is this a corridor where I slowly walk and hear some exposition dumps? We can spot sewer levels, we can spot on-rail segments, we can spot defend the vulnerable NPC, why is this in the game, escort mission. We spot them the frame they start to happen because we're so programmed to see them, we see them everywhere. So now it's very difficult to fool us, it's very difficult to give us something we don't expect. Like, as soon as you saw this room and there was that guy there, you knew it was going to go down. Like, right now, I know it's going down, I just don't know where from. And I want to do this as best as I can, so I'm being very tentative. And it's just because the soldiers kill you really quick. And when you can't heal, you don't know you're going to get the stim packs, because the stims are intentionally staggered in such a way that it's interesting, you know? And there's all these spawn cupboards knocking around, and all these opportunities for them to run down courtyards and mantle from the roof and stuff. You just don't know where they're going to come from, and it's nice. It's tantalizing. And I've done it, there's a checkpoint. And I know now, because of the language of video games, the moment it does that, I'm okay. And there's still more enemies, and now they're coming from below, but I know that if I die, I'm on this balcony, and it's not a problem. And that's a really good sequence right there. It's a fun, tense firefight where you're fighting your way up a staircase. They didn't re-establish anything, you know, they didn't create something new. They gave you factors that we've already seen in multiple video games, but they did it well. And I had a good time doing that one. As we fix some crates and get that big old box of ammunition again. I don't know how dynamic the ammo is in this game. If you carry certain weapons, if it gives you refills for them. It wouldn't surprise me if it worked like that. And now we've got a narrative moment here as it's going to kick off with these guys. Monsters meet soldiers. And we have the mighty sniper rifle. And we get to follow, I forget her name. She's quite important to the story, but I wasn't paying attention and I was skipping the cutscenes, but I do like the story in this game. Ooh, we get the autocannon too. Autocannon is interesting. This is high fire rate, high magazine, but for some reason it's nowhere near as strong as you think it would be. Very powerful gun still, but this is the kind of gun that when you touch somebody with this, they should just shatter into a big bloody pulp. But they don't. Especially the phase ticks, man. Phase ticks taking this cannon. Unbelievable. But she wants a boost. We're just going to skip to opening the door. And then we've got another bit of downtime here, guys, as we do some environmental puzzles and see what's going on. But I wonder if this was... how much of this was inspired by Half-Life 2 as well, because I wasn't a Half-Life guy. I played Half-Life 1 and 2. I played Half-Life 1 when it came out, I played Half-Life 2 on the Orange Box collection, so I was way later to Half-Life 2. But as far as narrative games go, Half-Life 2 is one of the most important ones, isn't it? Might not be a special game for me, because I wasn't in it when it came out, but I appreciate the value that it had. I'm having problems with my autocannon here too. I think I just lost it. Or maybe I just swapped it off. Because I think I thought when I swapped weapons, the character dropped it. Because there's a lot of games that do that when you pick up anything heavy. They just chuck it on the ground and you have to keep refinding it. But I think I just realised then, guys, that you can actually change your weapons and you don't lose the gun. So I'm just looking in that fence. There's a big fight that kicks off here, but you need the NPC to kick it off. And there's a door she needs to go through. Do you see where the plants are? You have to de-age the plant. And she comes through the gate. And then it kicks off a big fight. And this is actually kind of bad, this, too. It's really easy to die. She's called Catherine, there you go. Because there's a ton of guys in front of you with some really big guns. Some really accurate shots. And then about halfway through the sequence, they spawn a dude on the balcony with you. And the guy on the balcony absolutely rips into me. And because this was a first attempt, I don't get a chance to know he's coming. And of course, when you're on a balcony like this, you know they're going to try and mix it up somehow. There's the big dude with the autocannon. This guy here, he will kill you almost faster than anything else in the game. If you're close to this dude and he hits you, you're dead. His weapon puts you to no HP, and then if he hits you again, you die. It's incredibly strong what he's doing. Your gun doesn't seem half as good as his gun. And there's two of them. And I'm just going to hit the heads as much as I can here. I don't know if that's their weak point, but... And is this the guy on the balcony? Boom, see that? I don't know how I... Look, he threw a grenade. If he didn't throw a grenade just then, I was dead. Because he had to get the grenade out and it has an animation, he let me live then. I could have very easily died. All it took was one guy to flank me and hit me once. He could have hit me so many more times, then the fact I didn't die was a bloody miracle. But you'll notice a transition coming up, guys, because when I die on the next fight, because I've got no HP, it gives me all my shit back. And it's such a good piece of design, but it definitely makes the game a lot easier. If they didn't do that, this would have been interesting. Really interesting. I would have had to stagger my saves and redo footage so that I didn't get fucked. Did you see it? There was a transition. And now I've got my life back. So it just goes to show, you know. Like, good checkpoints and checkpoints that are conscientious of the player's struggle can be a great thing. They can also kill the challenge of your game. There's a heavy to my left here. I'm waiting for him to get closer. Oh, I'm going to just get him as he spawns. So if you stand here, for some reason he doesn't start shooting you immediately, and you can kill him before he even hits you. But this is the sequence where you run around with the big gun now, and you just lay waste to everyone. It's a really fun moment, this. Like, I wish the spread on this gun was a little tighter. And if it was hit scan, it would be even better. But this is one of the guns that really quite obviously looks like it's projectile, because you can see the bullets. And maybe it is hit scan, but it's got like a slow muzzle velocity or something. But this one feels really, really projectile, this one. That's a debated that, because you can't do anything to him who's grabbing Catherine. I feel like just then I saved her life. Flicked on him, shot him, nothing. But be really careful, because when you get this close, they strip you so fast. Luckily, the game has such a good system of flinching that as soon as you hit them, they can't do anything. And there we've got a stim pack, so that's one of the first stim packs we've seen for a while. Because med packs are what they want you to use, you know. But I like it. I like a game that has multiple healing systems. I think that's a really cool touch. If I were to make a first-person shooter, I think I'd give you a choice. And I'd make achievements for beating the game with all the different healing systems too, just so you could see which one was worse or which one was more fun or more interesting. I wonder how difficult that would be to do. But there's the stim. Just in case. And now we're going to push forward with the reload. And you'll notice me spinning the barrel, guys. To spin the barrel, you hold the right mouse button, and it enables you to fire immediately. And you can't sprint, though, obviously, when you do this, but I recommend highly that you always have this barrel spinning, because it means that you can immediately fight back. And it's one of the balance conceits that the game uses, and it doesn't really hurt you too much. It makes it feel a little bit unique, you know? But reload the weapon, keep pushing forward. Like, you can see me being really trying to be as on this as I can, because I really don't want to take any unnecessary hits. But in this particular sequence, I don't think there is anybody. I think this is, look at this, it's just a pacing moment. And boom! As soon as you let your guard down, boom, he gets you. But that guy didn't hurt me too much, thankfully. And there's going to be a guy attacking you here, but it's a cutscene. And it forces you to look to the side. But you can hit him with an impulse, turn him into chunks, and then move over to this ladder. And there's a couple of guys in here, I'm pre-firing them because they might have hit me previously. And then right out here, it's really easy to die here. This guy has an autocannon, and he hurts so much. Like, it's interesting that they throw the autocannon guy at you with a bunch of other guys, but they never throw the crazy teleporting Zek guy at you with other guys. Maybe that was a bridge too far for them. But I'm just going to keep covering those two avenues, and I think we're good to go here. But kick the door. Then we come inside. There's his checkpoint. And I've just shot my gun so the soldiers know I'm here. Which I absolutely don't mind at all, because I'm here to do gunfights, you know. I'm here to ruin people's day. You can hear him then as well. There's some really nice tells in this game telling you when people are still knocking around. It's not quite as good as Fear, though. Fear 1's tells, oh my god. Those dudes shouted everything at you. I don't even know why. Silly buggers. So another autocannon man in here. Be very careful with this guy. If you can, look at that. If you can pixel peek this dude, you're fine. If you can't, he wins every time. It's super frustrating. I'm trying to be cheesy here and snipe him at some distance, but not working. Luckily, we know that even though I've not done so well on that, here he is. Shoot his toe. The old toe shot. That's what you do, guys. When you can't win, shoot him in a knee. Boom. But if we get a checkpoint, we'll be able to get our life back, so we'll be fine. There's a shotgun there, the Volk. Really don't recommend the shotgun once you start getting the guns that you like, but, you know, it's all a preference thing at the end of the day. If you want to use it, go for it. And now we get another checkpoint, and hopefully we can get a nice refill. I'm hoping right here for some stims, but that's just going to be normal med packs, that. And then this fight in here is really difficult, but luckily the checkpoint gave me my life back. So this is 3 different heavies at once. And unfortunately, if they hit you, like, look at this, you see that? Boom. He hit me once. Full HP all the way down to 1 bar. Anything after that, you're dead. And I know there's another guy, so I'm going to wait on him, and I use the stim pack, and then I start hitting this dude. That guy didn't hit me as hard for some reason. He didn't do anywhere near the damage the other guy did. I don't really get the damage, but there that was. And then this dude, you can just pixel peek him. Rainbow 6 inches right in his mouth. Dude never stood a chance, did he? Bless him. And now as you push forward, you can continue on. But this is a hard room, this. I died a couple times in here, because they lock you in too. And when those dudes start pushing you, you can get pushed by 2 of those big heavies at the same time, and it's a really bad time. But there are more soldiers in here, so keep yourself cranked. Just in case. And here they are. Just 2 guys. And you see what I mean? As soon as you hit them once, they start doing the bullet dance. And then you're okay to start hitting someone else. And I love the idea of that. I love the idea of being able to hit everybody, put them in a stun animation, and then just punish them all. It's a great tool for the player. And then that guy busts in, nothing. See you later, friend. I'm just trying to keep my head on a swivel as best as I can. And there's the ghost writing everywhere if you're interested in the plot, which is actually a pretty cool device. Come back up here to refill the autocannon. And then we get to push on into an office. We get a checkpoint. This is a couple guys in here hiding behind the desks. You can't wallbang, which is unfortunate. It'd be really cool if you could shoot through the desks and stuff. But then if you could do it, they could probably do it too, and that might be really painful. How do you feel about bullet penetration when it works one way but it doesn't work the other? Because I feel like the player should be able to do more bullet penetration than the CPU, because the CPU could just shoot you through anything. because they know exactly where you are, and it doesn't really seem like a good idea, that. But letting the player have a bit of an advantage sounds really sick to me. Not too much of an advantage, obviously, but something. So the sensitivity on this part here is way off. It's not correct at all. I would have loved to have got gameplay there, guys, where I flicked from the guy on the right to the guy on the left perfectly, and it looked super clean. And if you slow that down, as I flick to the left, I actually hit him with a bullet as I'm doing it. But then I have to readjust because the sensitivity feels so weird. And I replayed that moment a couple times to see if I could get used to the weird aim on that segment, but it was awful. It wasn't right at all. Like, if that had been my normal sensitivity, I could do that almost every time, but it's just not correct. And that's one of the good things about modern games. You know, I've been a bit negative on modern gaming and how homogenous and uninspired and passionless it is and predictable. But the one cool thing is the accessibility. It's a lot easier now to standardize the mouse. It's a lot easier now to get your sensitivity where you need it to be. There are a lot more options and a lot more features, and that's a good thing. And even the Japanese ports, which, if they were a racehorse, they'd already be chapstick because they're fucking terrible. But they're incrementally less terrible than they were 10 years ago, so baby steps, but steps indeed. And then we get another Seeker segment, which is... when you pick the Seeker up, you know it's going to kick off. But you have to give her a boost, I think, up onto the middle platform before you can do this. And here we go, boost Catherine. So the moment you chuck her up, it's going to spawn some enemies. And you can see some wonderful, interesting clipping there with the arms, because they're not long enough for this FOV. And now we get the troops. So you should be shooting immediately. As soon as you hear the first bullet, send your stuff out, because there's a lot of guys coming now. And there's a lot of shields as well. So make sure you get rid of the shield dudes, because those guys are really interesting. You can also crouch. You don't have to stand here, guys. If you crouch and fire into the sky, you can guide the bullet perfectly and you'll be fine. You don't have to show any of your body if you don't want to, because the joy of bending bullets is that you can curve them up and down and left and right and all kinds of madness. And speaking of that, makes me think of Wanted and Weapons of Fate, that awesome game that's on PC but has a horrible mouse deceleration, so you can't use high sensitivity on it. And you can swipe your mouse like 40 inches and you don't even turn around. That's a horrible feature, that. Why would they put that in? I'd love to cover that game, guys. That game is such a fun game. I think it came out in like 2009 or something crazy, 2008. It's a really fun game too. And it would be a blast to replay it, because I've not played that game since it came out, and I got 1000G on it on the Xbox. But once again, they remake weird things, don't they? Remasters and remakes for games that you just don't expect and you don't understand. Oh, here we go. We get to use the powered up TMD, the Ghostbuster laser. So the thing with this here is, I think you have to follow that orb. If you follow the orb with your cursor and you stay close to it as you can, I think these sections go a little bit quicker. But if you don't, I think sometimes it can take a bit of a while. And I don't know if that's utter shit, but it's how it feels sometimes. It feels like if you just look at it sometimes, it takes way longer. Maybe it's like a microwave. You know, a microwave, when you stare at it and it just takes forever. So you keep turning away hoping for it to do things. I do that with my PC when I'm installing stuff and what have you. I feel like shit works when I'm not looking. The moment I look, it's like a boss, isn't it? It's the opposite of working, where when the boss looks, everybody pretends they're busy even if they're not. It's like the opposite of that. The mirror world of pretend you're busy. The boss is on the floor. And this is, speaking of bosses, this is actually the boss they foreshadowed. The huge crab man. And this is the part of the game where I did my balls deep, because this fight is on the balls deep video if you haven't seen it. And it's a pretty standard fight. He's going to slash away at you and you have to shoot his sacks, his like pustules or whatever they are. And then when you shoot enough of them, they stun him. And then he gets like these big ones on his head after you shoot like his balls, or his hip, his waist balls. He's got like latissimus dorsi balls, and then he gets weird head balls, and then fundamentally it's like some kinky S&M lady with high heels just wrecking shop. But he does hit me a few times, and he hurts. And it's one of those things where there's probably safe spots for these attacks, but I wasn't bothered enough to replay this and make it clean. Because I feel like the people that are listening right now and watching this there's probably going to be a small percentage of Singularity fans that are just like, this game's so cool, I like watching Singularity. And then there's going to be a bigger portion of people who just watch my videos because they like my channel, and you probably don't really care about the game or the gameplay that much. Although it is always appreciated when people care about the gameplay, because I try my best to make gameplay that is reflective of me, and gameplay that not everybody can make. This part fucking sucks, by the way. Watch these ticks. These ticks take this autocannon like champions. Watch this. Like, it's just insane. There's moments where I feel like the gun is missing more so than the tick is taking the hit, but there's times when you shoot the tick and it's fine, and it doesn't make any sense. And I just don't get it. Too many short scrapes on some of the footage where I died, where I'd shoot them and they would be fine, and I don't really know what's going on with that. But note to self, never ever let your guard down when ticks are about. And you can age them, and it like makes one inflate and kills a bunch of them, but as I've mentioned earlier, guys, I was trying not to use that ability too much. I wanted to use my gun. And then here we go. We get the showdown with this big dude. He's going to open his gob, you got to shoot him in the mouth, and then that's him done. See you later, bro. And the boss is down, and that's less of a gameplay boss and more of a cinematic fight, that one. But think about the ones that we've just done, you know? We've got the guy with the girder jumping around. He was a very gameplay fight, even if he was boring and formulaic. And then we took on the freezy guy that jumped around like a lunatic. And then we have this guy who's essentially the amnesia boss, where he's just, here's this big thing you don't do much to. Hey, great game. And now you get to use your Ghostbuster laser right on his face and do whatever is happening right now. Which looks pretty sweet, right, when you've got this amplifier. And then he falls off and my monitor makes an obnoxiously loud noise. I don't know what that was. One of the diodes popping or something. And there you go, guys. The boss is felled. We get this nice little cinematic as the train takes off. And we get a nice little bit of a fade. And then boom, transition into locating the pearl, the next part of the game. So once again, folks, if you haven't seen my balls deep, we also do this sequence too on that video. And there's an interesting contrast. I would recommend that you check that video out. Not so because I want to plug and whore my YouTube channel, my wonderful YouTube channel that nobody watches anymore, but more so for the posterity of it, you know. Oh, by the way, when you do this, it introduces a bunch of... Oh, is it not this one? There's one of these coming up where when you open... There, here we go. A bunch of face ticks. And you can impulse them and kill them all, but I tried it and I didn't kill them all, and the ones that were left killed me. So instead I decided to use the gun. So if you're wondering why I didn't just melee them, that's why. But if you watch that footage and you watch this footage, the most important thing to take from it is the difference that time can make. Because 3 years is a long time, especially on YouTube. But that is when I first essentially upgraded my PC and started trying to play more PC games. And I was looking for PC games to play, very much how I am right now, because I'm always looking for things to play, you know? But in those days, I was looking to practice my mouse and keyboard, because my mouse and keyboard wasn't very good. And at the time, if you watch that footage, guys, I'm actually playing on 4000 DPI. I've just got my new mouse, which is a like G502 Proteus, I forget the name of it. It's a Logitech mouse, very good mouse, but it's heavy. And I was playing the game and doing what I can, and I recorded that video, and that was at the point where I was on super high sensitivity. But I felt like my aim was okay, because I'm weird like that, you know? I like high sense. And if you watch that gameplay now and you compare it to the gameplay that you're watching, of course now I know a lot more about mouse and keyboard and sensitivity, and I know more about DPI and all the information that you need to understand what you're doing with your hand when you're aiming. I've become a student of aiming now, and it's something I'm very passionate about, whereas then I just wanted to have a good aim and I didn't really know what went into it. And you can see the difference between where I am now and where I was then. And it might not be that much of a difference, because the sensitivity options in this game are not quite where they need to be for you to get complete parity between games. And it's unfortunate that, because when you can get your sensitivity, there's a wonderful feeling of knowing that you're hitting it. And it's a wonderful feeling because it's a familiar feeling. It's like picking up an old game that you've got a lot of time in, and all of that experience just flooding back. And the difference here is it's in a game you've never played. And it happens in a lot of stuff. You know, like if you go and watch the Black Ops walkthrough I made for Cold War, I beat Cold War's campaign when it came out. I streamed it. I didn't think it was the best campaign, but it was a lot better than Modern Warfare's, which is one of the worst campaigns in my opinion. And I didn't play the campaign at all after that. I played a little bit of Zombies, but on Zombies I fundamentally hip-fired with shotguns because the mouse sense in that game is really shit. It's really shit, right? But there are certain parts of that game where the sensitivity isn't all jacked up and weird, that can be quite close to what your sensitivity is. And because I put my sensitivity in that game, and when the guns are working and when the FOV modifier is working correctly, the sensitivity is the correct one, I was able to transfer all of my skill on the mouse and keyboard directly into that game, even though I didn't have that much time on the game. And if you watch those videos, like I got accused of using aimbot on that video, which is a big compliment to somebody that's trying to get better at mouse and keyboard, especially on a game where the mouse is fucking horrible. But when you have those moments where it does work, you get to show people what your aim is really like. And it's a nice feeling when you flick your mouse and it lands on an enemy, and it lands on them very precisely, very quickly, and exactly where you wanted it to be. And that's why it's such a rewarding discipline to learn, you know. And it's like anything else. When you were learning controller, when you were learning an arcade stick, when you were learning a Guitar Hero controller, a DDR set, a DJ Hero set, a Steel Battalion set, whatever it is, a steering wheel, you know. So many controllers now where we look at them and we're like, oh, got to learn this new peripheral to figure it out. But that's the future, dude. That's where the skill ceilings are. That's where you push yourself and you learn something about your abilities. And right now, for me, my favourite is mouse and keyboard. And that's the reason why you see it a lot on my channel. Because it's tangible improvements. It is a tangible improvement in a system that you'll never master. And just knowing that you'll never be as good as you want to be is an interesting factor, because on controller, there's a ceiling. There's a very noticeable ceiling that I think everybody hits, and everyone's ceiling is slightly different because people have different abilities and different aptitudes. But there comes a point, especially when you've been playing controller a long time, you know, I played controller for like 29 years and I still play it. So you could say I've been on controller my whole life, as some people like to say, but I don't really understand that, because how can you say your whole life when you're not dead yet? Like, are you going to kill yourself or something? I've been a gamer my whole life. How do you fucking know? What a stupid thing to say. But pedantry aside, I noticed that there were limits to what I could do on controller, because it was limited by the games that I played. I played on max sensitivity on every game I played, and I forced myself to do it, even though at times it was a pain in the ass and I couldn't be as precise on like micro adjustments as I could on macros. But when you got to certain games where the sensitivity was low and it couldn't be made higher, then what do? It doesn't matter how good you are on a controller or how fast you are on a controller when the sensitivity itself will not let you turn. So you hit these walls of ability where you know if the technology advanced, you could be faster and better and more capable, but the biggest issue with controller that I have currently is that they don't really do anything with it. Like, if you think about where controller came from and how it changed from being a D-pad with 2 buttons, and now we've got all kinds of gyro technology and motion controls and dual analogs and haptic feedback and, you know, all these crazy things that we've innovated on and we've applied, and we've got to a point where there's all kinds of interesting gimmicks that no one really uses and nobody really cares about, because the fundamentals have lasted long enough and that's all people really care about. But we haven't innovated on those fundamentals, so the fundamentals themselves have essentially stagnated. And there's been small improvements here and small improvements there, but the big problem is a lot of people are very reticent to change, and they react defensively and emotionally to it, because nobody wants to go from being good at something to being bad at something, and it being the same thing, just in a different delivery system. And I think that's one of the difficulties of getting anybody to learn anything new. It's like learning a language, isn't it? Learning a language is incredibly humbling and humiliating at the same time, because you have to go from being rather eloquent and rather well-versed in communication to being a fucking idiot, being a village idiot for a while. But the thing that you don't realise is when you make an effort to speak somebody's language, when you try to talk to them in their own tongue, even if you say something that makes no fucking sense, they know that you don't know how to speak their language and you're trying. They know how hard it is to learn languages themselves. They know that you've took that time to try to be better than you were the day before in something. And all of those anxieties that people have and those worries where they don't want to look silly or they don't want to offend somebody or they're too intimidated to do it, like, it all just bleeds away, because at the end of the day it's somebody who's taking the effort to learn something cool and someone who's done that, who's like, that's cool, you know? And you realise it's all just kind of silly and it's all just a psychological self-sabotage that stops you from doing interesting things. That was weird, wasn't it, with the container? It fell so quickly then. I wonder if it's meant to fall that fast. That was odd. But here's the pearl, anyhow, getting on the pearl. But I really look forward to Controller exceeding its limitations and turning into something unique. And there's been some stuff on my Discord recently where people have been showing potentially the future of new controlling schemes, and I think that stuff is very excited. And I think it's silly and myopic for people to kind of get used to something that's not the best, you know? Because there's always room for improvement, there's always room for iteration. And do you not want to control what you do in a video game in a better way? Because I know I do. And even mouse and keyboard has its limits and has its flaws and has areas where maybe, who knows, in 15 to 20 years we might come up with something a bit better, a bit more fine-tuned. It's just at the moment it's one of the best devices that we know, you know. It's one of the most precise and skillful means of controlling the games. And until something else turns along and flips that wheel, that's what we have and that's what we deal with. But this part of the game is the obligatory boat level. And it commits one of the crimes of first-person shooters at this period of time, which is egregious amounts of screen shake. And this is another moment where I get to actually compliment modern games and talk in a much more favourable mean towards them, because in modern games you can turn off a lot of screen shake now. You can turn off a lot of head bob, you can turn off a lot of crazy artifacts and all kinds of silliness that happens for cinematic reasons rather than gameplay reasons. Ooh, this is it, by the way, the Dethex launcher. This is that other weapon you barely see. So when you shoot this grenade, you can then move the projectile with your mouse. But it's rolling on the ground, so it turns it into like Marble Madness. It's an explosive terrorist edition of Marble Madness, and it's going to be coming up in a moment when we use it to solve a puzzle. But this is another great example of Singularity having these wonderful moments of character. This is a gun you find like twice, and you never see it. You won't even see me use it after I use it to open a door. It is a gimmick gun for opening a door that you could probably use and have a lot of fun with, but they created it for a moment. It existed in that moment, it was fabulous, and then it never turned up again. And I do think that there's something to be said with discipline like that. Like, look at Doom Eternal and the Marauder. The Marauder is something... Oh, watch this too. I still haven't learnt my lesson about shooting the stupid helicopter when they're jumping out the back, even though there's clearly an invisible wall stopping me from doing it. But Doom Eternal has an enemy called the Marauder, which is a very dangerous elite enemy that essentially plays a little bit like the player. He charges at you with an interesting arsenal and vast suite of weaponry. And he's very defensive and intelligent in how he does what he does. He has a glaring weakness though. But unfortunately, the glaring weakness is apparently too subtle, because a huge glowing light and a random sound after the game has given you an entire paragraph on how to beat him before you even fought him. Apparently that wasn't enough for a lot of players to give them the tools that they needed to overcome this particular foe. And the internet was alive with people bitching and moaning and complaining about something that is actually rather elegant and a really cool addition to the cast of enemies to kill. And instead it's just like, remove the Marauder, delete the Marauder, I can't beat the Marauder. Why can't I spam the rocket on the Marauder's shield? Why does the dog constantly molest me the whole time? Because I haven't really figured out that when I shoot his shield it spawns the dog. Like, all of these wonderful observations from people that I question how they even cross the street without dying. These people go on to complain about something that is one of the more elegant parts of a very elegant game, and everybody complains, even though there's no real reason to, but the dumb people shout the loudest, and they want them nerfed, they want them removed, and then the developers, they say fuck you, and then they throw more of them at you. Which is wonderful, right? It's a wonderful response to essentially people not understanding the game. If you don't understand the game, you fight the Marauder the wrong way, the Marauder turns into an absolute nightmare, and you deserve every single moment of that nightmare because it's your fault. You didn't learn what the developers were teaching you, you didn't pay attention, you didn't read the tips, you just face-rolled your entire existence across a keyboard, and I don't even know how you didn't trigger sticky keys, or at least open several instances of Photoshop. You know, because that's just what it is, let's face it. It's people that don't pay attention enough complaining about things that they were told that they didn't realise they'd been told. But there the grace kind of ended for the developer, because they created a boss that's essentially just a Marauder but nowhere near as interesting, way more punishing and frustrating and nowhere near as creative to fight. So they went from being the hero that championed this chalice of difficulty and not essentially pandering to these terrible players. Oh, did you see that, by the way? I was crouch walking just then, and it bust through the door, ran directly up to me and punched me in the face. So that enemy right there, guys, is a scripted attack. You cannot use their weakness of sound against them because they are automatically programmed to know where you are. And there you go. But even, you know, id and the team who made this wonderful enemy then went in and tactlessly, gracelessly made this boss that apes this enemy. But instead of understanding what made the enemy so great, they focused on all the things that made it tedious. And then created a boss that has essentially, for many people, ruined the DLC. And even a team as capable as those guys that have made this amazingly important game, which I'm going to be covering on the channel after the 2 projects that I'm commentating right now, even after they've made Doom Eternal, one of the most important games I can think of in recent memory, they still fuck up. Because they don't have, in that instance, the discipline and the grace to do the subtle thing. And instead they do the overt thing, they slap you in the face, they tango you, and boom, it gets a mixed response. And I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not saying it's right, but what I am saying is that when it comes to those moments of grace, discipline, and taking a risk in design, I think as homogeneous and generic as Singularity can be accused of being, and I don't think that those claims are unwarranted, but as much as you can say that about this game, there are wonderful moments in design where they show just a brutal amount of just focus and dedication to the simplest, smallest moment being completely itself, completely absorbed in itself, and then never coming back. And I love that. I love the idea of making some goofy thing for one singular moment that you never see again. That's the kind of diversity and gimmick in a fun way rather than in a negative way that I think can elevate a game. And it's one of the reasons I really like Hideki Kamiya, because his games always have moments like that. The problem with Hideki Kamiya is he's a lunatic, so the grace and the discipline of those gimmicky moments oftentimes outstay their welcome and aren't disciplined and aren't graceful. But it doesn't mean that he shouldn't keep trying, and it doesn't mean that every so often he doesn't absolutely nail it, you know? And I love the fact he takes risks, even in the face of several questionable design moments in his games. It's really nice to just know that when you play those games, you are going to be thrown into these odd circumstances, these strange situations, and it's going to elevate the standard A to B to C to D linear path and progression event structure that you see in a lot of games. Oh, that's a bad idea. I thought that was like in the past, because it was all ghost vision. I didn't realise it was actually on, so yeah, don't step into water when there is an active electrical current going through it. Turns out that doesn't end well for the human body, or for the video game body. But here's another one of the weapon lockers where you can mess with your weapon upgrades. We won't be touching that for obvious reasons. And now we have to retrieve the E99 bomb, as my screen is telling me that I'm having an aneurysm, or I'm healed apparently. I'm Lazarus. I came back. And when I sat down to do this commentary, I actually thought this video was 2 hours long, and I really wish it was, because speaking for another hour when you've been talking for 2 hours is not the easiest thing to do. But here we are, ladies and gentlemen. And all you have to do here is swim up to the bomb and pick it up. But I'm giving these dudes a wide berth, because I'm thinking that they're way more dangerous than they are. And you can't do anything under the water here. So I'm having a look around to see if there's any kind of tool I can use to kill them. But I think you just swim directly up to it and get on with it. Not a big deal, really. But it's one of those universal languages of video games, isn't it? You have the new player that runs immediately into danger and dies from some trap or some dangerous enemy that they didn't respect. And then you have the experienced player that respects an enemy that's not even dangerous because you're so used to seeing threats and threat assessment that you think that you're in more danger than you're actually in. So now you do this wonderful jumping around like a moron for 5 minutes trying to figure out some circuitous way of doing this, and in reality you just go forward. But look how trepidatious I am. Like, I'm using my impulse and stuff. I'm trying to freeze shit and everything. You don't have to do any of this. This is how it works, guys. You just can't turn it off, you know? You know when you see those people in competitive multiplayer that stand in windows and don't strafe? I'm just gonna shoot someone out of this window. You just sit there thinking, how's he sitting still for so long, dude? I'm getting antsy just watching this. Move, you dickhead. There's probably somebody about to shoot you. But he's just like squinting at his TV, at his 45,000-inch TV. Staring into his home cinema set with a surround sound, smashing his neighbours. And he's just like, I'm immersed, bro. I'm so immersed. But now that the Pearl is lost its E99 power source, we now have to get out of here in a wonderful get out of dodge while the screen shakes and everything falls around you and it begins to flood and rain and drip and leak. And for some reason this always reminds me of, is it Crew Expendable, the first level from COD 4? And the only thing they really have in common is they're both boats and they both shake the screen. But I don't know why it is, I get that feeling, you know? And now we're going to be swimming our way out. This game has a lot of opportunities too to do interesting cuts. You could have literally cut the flash on that wave hitting you to you breaking the crest of the surface here, and you could have skipped all of this swimming out. Because fundamentally, you're not really doing anything, are you? That's a narrative moment just then. But because this game does have the pacing that I mentioned, that's when you age a tick, by the way. See how that tick is all big and stuff? He's now going to run and detonate on his buddies. It's really, really strong, that move. Very, very powerful. And if you're wondering why I have P as a keybind, and you're probably thinking, Jesus Christ, Chris, do you have fingers like E.T.? Are you a pianist? What the fuck's going on there? I play a game called Bad Business, and Roblox, for some reason, doesn't pick up the side buttons on your mouse. And whenever a game enables me to use like a healing tool, any kind of heal button, I generally put it on my mouse side button. Because I'm one of those people that I don't ever think you should put any kind of complicated feature on mouse buttons, because your mouse should be used to aim, and your hand should be focused on aiming and nothing else. I am a big purist of that, because it's just one of those, it's just a fundamental principle of having better aim. But there are a lot of people that like to put things on those buttons, and more power to you if you like it. But for me, the only thing I do generally is healing. Sometimes I do grenade on my mouse wheel. Those are the two that I use, but I try my best not to use them at all, really, so I can just focus on what needs to be done. This is a difficult sequence, this, by the way. Anything with face ticks sneaking up on you, really dangerous. Just unbelievably dangerous. And in order to get around the side buttons not working, I actually changed the binding in the software for my mouse, so that when I press my side button, it presses P on the keyboard, and then I bound the healing device to P in the game. So when I press that button on Bad Business, it pulls my instant heal out. And that's the reasoning for that, if you're wondering. And because you do that at a system level from the software instead of doing it at the game level, now when I press that button, instead of finding like mouse button 3 or whatever it is, it just says P. And I haven't had anybody ask, like, how the hell do you hold W and press P? Because in all honesty, guys, I can barely do it. I can do it, but I can barely do it. And it's using my thumb and putting a really weird fanning technique of my hand. Like, it's a really, really awkward stretch, that. I do not recommend it. This part right here, this was going really badly. Because they were running up the walls, I couldn't shoot them, they were like clipping through the geometry. This was a really scary sequence, but it's over, thankfully. And now all we have to do is shoot some tripwires. But there's a couple of moments of Singularity where I remember, and there's a surprisingly large amount of things that I don't remember. Like, I didn't remember the enemy coming up. This particular creature coming up as well, I think it's the reason the Seeker gun exists. Because when you listen to this creature fire its weapon, it sounds like when you fire the Seeker. And I think that this is the fiction's way of explaining where they got that technology from, isn't it? I don't remember the story, it's been a long time since I actually played for the story. Like, I remember the fundamental of the story with the time manipulation, but I don't remember where these guys came from. But they're essentially like an armoured arachnid of some sort that fires this huge exploding beam. And I'm just going to use this wonderful piece of geometry here to collide and stop him from hitting me and put him down. And then keep moving forward. Now we've got the autocannon, we're just death dealing on every single opportunity. And then coming through here we have another opportunity to do some experimentation in environments, with the dialogue playing, with Barazov speaking to us. And because you've just seen that new enemy, your brain's thinking about it now. You're wondering if any more of those dudes are going to bust through the roof and everything. But then you realise that this is essentially a safe room with an augmenter. And that door opened so that you could go and continue with the next part of the game. And I can't quite remember what the next part is, but it might be the big bridge full of Seeker shots. Which I think we've got to unlock it first. But I do remember this part of the game, but I only remember it kind of loosely. Like, I didn't remember that those creatures existed. I didn't remember the boss as well that threw the girder. There were certain moments I just did not remember. What we got in here? Autocannon ammo. They're really giving it us. Usually when you get a gun like this in a video game, you don't get to carry it for half as long as I've got to carry it in this game, and that's another one of the feathers in the cap of Singularity. Like, I have to think really hard to think of a game where you can find like a special weapon hidden on an early level that you can carry for the rest of that game. And it reminds me of Gears of War. The very first Gears of War, when you knew how to get like really, really cool stuff, and you could keep it if you kept it and you didn't reload your save in an awkward manner. Oh, this is that puzzle featuring the explosive ball, by the way. So you pick up the Death X launcher, and then you fire it through this gap, and you roll the ball into the explosives, and it opens the door. And I fucked it up just then, because I'm dumb. It's kind of weird to control. You have to do it like that. There you go. And that's the weird ball. And you can guide it. It's very unusual. I love the idea of it, though. This is the weapon that you troll your friends with in the multiplayer. But now that we've done that, it's opened up the way we need to go. I'm going to keep firing it, because I've not had a chance to fire it, though, and it's pretty fun. But the door's open now, so it's not the end of the world. And I'm going to get my gun back, because as fun as this gun is, compared to the utility of the autocannon, there's no reason to do it. But, like, look at that. That is literally just a puzzle involving a weapon we've seen twice in the game and will probably never see again. And if you do see it again, it's because you know the game well and you found a secret spot where it turns up, which is awesome, you know? I love the idea of the little caches that give you things. That's one of the things I love the most about Doom, you know, on the surface. I love the idea of exploring in Doom and getting rewarded with ammunition for the really good weapons. But Doom Eternal, one of my big pet peeves with that game is when you do exploration and you try and find something, all you find are those secrets, and the secrets are just little tidbits of information about the game, which is awesome if you're interested in that, but it never feels like you're being rewarded in the game. You're being rewarded in the menu that's not in the game, you know? And it's kind of the downside of how Doom is. Because Doom is all about the dance of using the chainsaw to get your ammo back, that you don't really value ammo the same way, because you value the chainsaw because that's your key to ammo, and you value the moments of resources during the battles, you know? So there's no exploring hoping to find extra shells, because in that game you get them on the first fodder enemy that you find, because that's how the game is made, you know? And it's interesting because it's pure gameplay at that point. It's 1000% about the next fight, and it's completely eliminated the strive to find some kind of sexy secret, because you don't get rewarded outside of maybe... I mean, if you find BFG ammo, that's obviously really good, and that might be what you find in Doom every so often, but you find a lot more of those question marks and like figurines and floppy disks and things. Like, it's kind of weird, isn't it, when you think about it? Doom was so fundamentally about finding secrets that gave you a gun you didn't get for like 3 levels, or ammunition for a gun that had really rare ammo. And then in Eternal, because they've completely fundamentally changed how the game works, that is not a mechanic anymore. That's not something that happens. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't matter that much, but I feel like to the Doom purist, that's probably one of the things that might bug them the most about Eternal. Because the sense of exploration leading to a reward that is tangible in what you are about to do is diminished. And then we get a new enemy here, which is a super heavy Zex that's really slow, and he's got like one weird arm. That sucked. Some of the delay when you put that on is kind of odd. It made me look then that I've got like no reflexes and I didn't react, but I can assure you guys there was obviously something happening. And boom, did you see that? This new enemy can bring the Zex back, or can kind of possess them and turn them into a problem. Luckily, he doesn't like getting a belly full of chain gun, so it doesn't really matter that they have this resurrection tool, because I have an auto cannon and I don't give a shit. But there we go. Combat encounter is conquered. But let us continue on, pushing towards the denouement of Singularity. Which leads me to something I was talking about the other day. Because we were talking about silly things in movies earlier on. And I watched Terminator again the other day, for the first time in a while. And there was a scene that really jumped out to me this time. And I've been watching Terminator for like the last 30 years. I love that movie. I think it's a great, great horror movie. I think it's one of Arnie's best as well. The way he performs his role in that movie is just sublime. And it's early too for him, so I think he did a fantastic job of being a machine, you know, being synthetic. But there's a scene in it that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it's one of those scenes that kind of has to exist so that the movie can work. But it just became so obviously against everything they'd set up at that point. So, at the beginning of the movie, Kyle Reese's character says to Sarah Connor that... I say at the beginning of this movie, it's not at the beginning at all, is it? It's a bit further in than that, but you know what I mean. He says that this thing will hunt you, it will find you, and it will not stop. It won't sleep, it won't eat. All it will do is try to find you and fuck you up. Because it won't stop until she's dead. And it's a really awesome moment, and I didn't try to quote the quote, because the quote is great, and just go listen to the quote instead, you know. But fundamentally, Kyle's trying to tell her that the only thing that this thing does is try to kill her. That's it. It has no other drives, there's no other motivators, it can't be reasoned with, it can't be bargained with. It doesn't feel guilt or remorse. You know the line, it's a fantastic line, right? And he tells you this to get across to the audience that this thing has one purpose and one purpose alone, and it's not going to deviate from this purpose for anybody. And you see throughout the movie, the Terminator has a complete and utter indifference towards human life. It will kill when it needs to kill, it will hurt when it needs to hurt, it will maim when it needs to maim. And it doesn't really matter the order in which that works. And it's one of the interesting parts about the movie, actually, when you think about it, because when it goes into the gun store, at the beginning of the film. It shoots the clerk, who tells it can't take the guns, because you're not allowed to load them, obviously. Just kills him cold-blooded, dead, right? He's not a target, he's just a bystander, gets wrecked. And then later on in that tech-noir club, the door guy goes to grab the Terminator on the shoulder, and Arnie crushes his hand in this wonderful scene where he just like crushes it without even looking at him, effortlessly, and then lets him go and continues on because he's looking for Sarah. And it's showing his drive, isn't it? Showing that the fact that he's focused, solely focused. But he doesn't kill that guy. Crushes his hand, doesn't like smash his face and break his skull and demolish his brain and everything, just completely just flatten him. Doesn't do that. Although he effortlessly could. Which is an interesting thought. But then later on they get into a shootout in a car park between two cars, and they're shooting at each other. And it leads to a chase, and it leads to the police swerving, locking them in, trapping them in this place, and Kyle and Sarah get arrested. Well, Kyle definitely does. But there's this moment where the Terminator crashes the car next to where Sarah Connor's car is, and then in the movie they get arrested. Everyone's thinking like, what the fuck's going on with the Terminator? What's happening here? This is kind of weird. And then it does this shot showing you that the car is empty and that the Terminator is gone. He's just vanished like a fucking Michael Myers move, you know? Oh my god, he was laid just there with a knife and now he's gone! You know, it's this weird horror movie trope that you see. And I've never even thought about it. I've watched that movie probably 100 times or something stupid. I had it on VHS, recorded it off the TV, loved it, you know, when I was a kid. But I never ever thought about that scene. And I was watching it the other day, and it super jumped out to me. All we know about the Terminator is that it exists to kill Sarah Connor. That's its prime directive. That's its only programming, right? The Terminator hits a car into a concrete wall, damages the skin, the fleshy casing on its body, damages the like wrist to a degree, but not to a point where it can't function. It's not a debilitating illness, right? Sarah Connor is right there. The Terminator is right there. And there's a handful of squad cars with police officers with probably pistols, revolvers, snub noses, some shotguns. It's light arms that can't damage the Terminator. Can stun the Terminator but cannot kill. Can damage the shell but cannot crack the steel, you know? They're not the right tools for the job. And all we know about this dude is that this is a really interesting sequence actually, guys. This is a long bridge of tons of dudes, and they give you 1,000,000 Seeker rifles, and all you do is snipe the living shit out of all of them. It's really, really cathartic and fun, but it might not be the most interesting thing to watch. I was very tempted to speed it up, but I've kept it at normal speed, so we'll just keep talking Terminator if you don't mind. So I'm watching this back, and he runs away when his target, his mission objective, is literally there and could have been finished in that moment. Kyle has a shotgun, but he's used a ton of shells. He might not even have any ammo left for it. I don't know if the Terminator himself has any ammo left for the guns that he has in that moment, but he probably does, because, you know, he's carrying that ridiculous 1911 with a long slide on it, and that goofy laser, and he's obviously got the spaz. We've seen that. We've seen the Israeli Uzi, which he might have tossed or might not be in the car or might have lost it at some point. Like a... And even then, he doesn't need a gun to kill a woman. To kill anyone, you know? He's made that quite obvious. He doesn't need that. He's a robot. He's a machine. So he gets out of the car. He goes and he fucks up Kyle. What's Kyle going to do? Doesn't have anything. Has to run away, right? The only thing they can do in that moment is run away, and they can't run away because the police will shoot them. So the Terminator gets out of the car, goes up to Kyle and Sarah, and wrecks the living shit out of both of them, and the movie ends, right? Horrible movie at that point. 15 minutes long. What a terrible cinema ticket. Then in the scene afterwards, you see the Terminator. He gets the room, doesn't he? And he goes and he does maintenance in the room. But if you look at this is what really got me thinking. And I know this is pedantic and stupid and doesn't matter, and it's just a movie, Chris. Why are you going so deep with this? But, you know, I've got to fill 3 hours worth of commentary. What am I going to talk about? Seeker rounds again? But he goes to this apartment complex, rents this room or whatever, or climbs through the window or whatever it is. And then he goes and he does maintenance. And what does he do? He messes with the like tendon, the steel piston tendon-y things in his wrist, and he clamps a few things on them, and you can see him moving his fingers, right? So potentially, if you look at that injury, you could say that it damaged the mobility in his arm, in one of his arms, right? So he didn't have full function in one of his arms, even though all he needs to do is swing one of his arms like a weapon. Doesn't need crazy, like, precise motor function in it at all. Can use it as a simple battering tool to hit somebody, and it'll probably kill them. And then his other injuries on his face. There's damage to his eye. But we know that underneath the scanners and the technology of the Terminator is fine, right? It's cosmetic damage to the frame, to the skin that he's got, the synthetic skin that they've grown on him, or whatever it is. So all he does is take his eye out in a wonderfully, like, gory and horrifying way that's aged kind of rough in some ways, but I still love it because it's just that classic thing where he takes his eye out and we get wonderful not anthropomorphic, what is that word? It's the name for a film puppet, isn't it? What do they call them now? It's an A word and I'm completely flanking on it in the brain. But is it an A word? I'm questioning my brain now. Animatronic, there you go. I just completely lost it. I don't know why. So we get to see animatronic Arnold Schwarzenegger looking fucking awesome for the time, guys. It's like 1984. It's really good technology. It just doesn't look so good now. And we get to see him like wobbling about with his weird pale skin. And he's got a big old hole in his head where his eye was, where he's stabbed it out with a scalpel. And you see the robot underneath, which is, adding credence to the story that we're being told, that this is this killing machine sent from the future and everything. And his eye's fine, right? It's just damage on the shell. So he's got a little bit of tendon damage on his function of his left arm, or his left wrist, or whatever it is. A little bit of cosmetic damage on his eye, which he then removes. And that was enough to make him run away, instead of killing the very reason he's there to exist to begin with. I don't know, man. We'll have to email James Cameron and get answers, clearly. But does anybody else think that scene's kind of interesting for that? Because I never noticed as I was younger. Like, I've watched that movie so many times. Never really occurred to me that for some reason this Terminator that will never stop until she's dead, will never sleep, will never eat, never feel guilt, remorse, runs away when it gets a little scratch on its eyelid and hurts its wrist. So it was so jarring to me when I watched it recently. And it's not going to take away the mastery that is that movie. I think that movie's amazing. I think it's just incredibly sublime. Because essentially it's a low-budget horror movie. And it's fucking superb. And then it went on to generate the greatest sequel ever made. But I just thought it was so weird. Anyhow, ladies and gentlemen, that is the scheduled Terminator 2 conversation. I say Terminator 2, sorry, Terminator 1 conversation for today's stream. Even though this is not a stream, this is a video. You know what I mean, the stream of consciousness that we're on right now. And we're currently sidestepping around this piece of object to shoot a seeker. I think that this enemy is one of the areas of Singularity that needed a bit more time. It doesn't really do much. It doesn't really have any kind of mobility to put the player in an awkward position. It's just a tank that takes a lot of damage, that exists to be a bit of a beefy nuisance. And I feel like that creature could have climbed the walls. It could have really forced you to move. They could have made it so that seeker round, when it hits the ground, there's a definite delay. So it hits the ground, you go, oh shit, run away, and you're running away as it's making that ominous noise, and then it detonates, and it could have kind of fenced you in and pinned you in and things, and made you have to really think on your feet. But instead it just turns up, and then you clip on it, and then you kill it, and it's dead. And it's kind of pointless, really, isn't it? I'm carrying the Seeker for a decent chunk of this level too, just because they gave you so much ammunition, and why would you not use it? But there's a stim pack, rare footage of a stim pack midway through this mission. I really like the running animation too. It's very subtle, like it's... I say subtle, that's not what I meant to say. It's very kind of... It's the opposite of subtle, isn't it? It's very jarring. but it's a nice touch. You can even see how it bends the wrist. It bends his left wrist at a weird angle because it looks like when they've animated it, the properties of the rigging haven't quite been done to the level that you would expect to be done nowadays. So it just kind of warps his wrist. But it still works. And believe it or not, at this point, running animations like that weren't as standardized as you'd think. Like, there's games in this time period that had a running animation that was just they put the gun down and it looks like you're gliding across the map. It doesn't even look like you're moving, it looks like you're floating. Whereas this game was essentially trying to do the COD thing, you know. COD had always had interesting looking running animations because it's one of those extra dimensions that adds depth to first person shooters. And then here we have a gas mask mechanic. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, talking about just really throwing everything in your game, we now have a gas mask on and we're picking up oxygen tanks to keep it filled, which this makes me think of Dead Space. And we got more zombie dudes. And of course, Dead Space didn't invent this. I don't know what invented it, but you can go back as far as Sonic, can't you, with the whole, I'm suffocating, I've got to find a bubble really quickly while this music terrifies me. And then we got this weird, I don't even know, what is that? Some kind of centrifugal device? What is it? I don't even know what that is. Madness. It's doing something. Looks like one of those, it looks like a fairground ride equivalent of those things that they train G-Force into pilots that they probably don't even use anymore, because there's the one that's the gyroscope, isn't there, that just rotates them, and then there's the one that's got them on the end of that big arm and it just whips them around that circular chamber. I wonder if you can play on one of those. You know, go to one of those places and just pay them some money so you can experience some crazy spin shit. I'd like to feel 6 Gs, please. Just pass out, swallow your own tongue and die. Well, more zombies here as we're suffocating. There's a puzzle here that's kind of frustrating to me because there's this broken glass motif happening and you have to fire an orb of slow motion. And when you fire the orb of slow motion, sometimes the detection on it will hit the broken glass instead of hitting through it and making the door slow down as it's meant to do the puzzle. And if you don't realise that it's hitting like an invisible thing on it, it seems like you can't do it that way. And you might run around like an idiot trying to figure out a puzzle that you've already figured out like I did. But luckily, it's not too bad and it's pretty obvious. But if you come over here, this is it. This window here, sometimes you try and fire through this window and it just doesn't let you do it. And it can lead to this puzzle taking a bit longer than it perhaps should take. But if you watch, you fire through there, you freeze the door, and then you go under the door. And it's easy, right? But every time I tried to do that, the bubble kept hitting the window even though there was no glass in the window. And it was getting really frustrating. So you can see I'm nearly suffocating because I trimmed out some of the footage of it not working. And I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was doing it wrong. Maybe I was, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like the collision was being a cunt. But what can you do, ladies and gentlemen? You just have to get on with it. And then we have this portal over here that we can open. And then when we go through, we change the time. Which kind of reminds me a little bit of Cause and Effect from Titanfall 2, which is another wonderful level involving time manipulation. What do you think's your favourite time manipulation level in a video game, guys? That one in Titanfall 2 is pretty difficult to top because it's such a cool one. But I do think games have done some good stuff with time. I think time is really sick. I think Quantum Break had some really nice story beats tied to time travel and time manipulation. But back onto the balcony here, there's a vent to our left. When you drop down this vent coming up, there's a sequence of enemies to kill here. There's quite a lot of them as well. It's an interesting firefight, but we have the autocannon so we can completely trivialise it. So we hop up here and do some interesting Metal Gear Soliding. Which I wonder what's going to happen to Metal Gear Solid. Just think about it. Konami have the rights to it. They've obviously ousted Kojima. They could do anything they want with those games, and they pretty much have, because they've turned most of them into pachinko machines that just steal people's money. It'd be so cool. Can you imagine if like PS5 and PC and the next gen got an upscaled and up-resed and faster loading and performing version of those games? You got Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 in some crazy ass up-res collection, the ultimate Metal Gear collection. Just having Metal Gear Solid 4 on another machine would be a nice idea, wouldn't it? But I guess we'll never get that. I always hoped that they'd go back in and remake the original Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, because those games were on the SNES or something crazy, like the NES and shit. Can you imagine trying to play those games? Like, unless you were there when you were younger and you have that crazy nostalgia, going back to those games is going to be such a difficult proposition, because if you're not into retro games, it's just going to feel like you're playing some bullshit game on an Argus touchscreen when you wait for your parcel to be delivered, you know? And it's unfortunate because the stories are great, and obviously what happens in the stories then goes on to influence what happens in the sequels, and you learn all about these characters that you've no idea who they bloody are because you didn't play those games. And if they went back in and they did like the Twin Snakes treatment without all the obnoxious cutscenes that were insane, which I absolutely loved when it first came out, but I definitely preferred the original, but I did like how bombastically stupid they were. You know that moment when he kicks the grenade up the fucking barrel of the tank? What were they thinking? Bloody stupid, but it's fun, you know? Sometimes it's fun to let some crazy person do crazy things. And I respect the hell out of them for doing that. It's also the easiest Foxhound rank in the series, so if you want to get a nice easy Foxhound rank and say that you've done that once, that's the game to choose. But we've got some barrels here, we've got Zex taking on soldiers. This is another part of the game too, which I really think they could have gone even heavier on. The infighting between two factions is one of those things that when I first saw it in like Turok Dinosaur Hunter, I thought that this was the future. And there are a few systems like this in games. Whenever I see destructible environments, that right there screams future technology to me in video games. When I see enemies fighting other enemies, that always means like future tech to me. And the same with dismemberment or detailed gore. Those three factors, that's like late 90s PC to me, where you saw it and you just went, oh my god, this is the future, nothing's going to be the same again. And it's really funny, isn't it, 20 years later, to just see how much of this isn't in games. Nothing is destructible anymore because you'd break the physics and the frame rate would die. There's no gore anymore because apparently we don't like violence in video games, even though the most popular games in the world all involve combative elements. And then when it comes to infighting between factions, like, we don't even really get that. And when we do get it, it's not even real. It's some bullshit scripted nonsense to give the illusion of it, but it's just half-assed programming, and in reality, the moment they notice the player, they both fuck you up anyway. Like, you can even go as far as Last of Us Part 2 for that, where the DLC on the original Last of Us with the two factions was really interesting because you could use the clickers to jack them up. And then you play Last of Us 2, and it hasn't really evolved it at all. It hasn't taken it anywhere. It's, if anything, the exact same as it was. And it's just madness to me, that. It doesn't make any sense that we've moved so... Because when was Last of Us, like 2015 or some shit? So it's like 5 years or something crazy between the two games. And what did they improve? They made you hate the story. They made you hate the characters. They made you hate the fucking game. Well, that's a bunch of things I didn't even know I wanted. Because I didn't want them. And that's what you gave me. And it's madness, isn't it? Like, look at Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2. Something like 10 years between those two games, and what did they improve? They made the movement worse, they made the shooting worse, but now the horse's balls are detailed. And I mean, when you think about it, what do you really want from a game, yeah? I think they picked the right thing. Ooh, be really careful here too. Lots of phase sticks randomly coming out of that gutter for no reason. Just a random sewer in the wall, releasing the most dangerous enemy in the game. And then this is a pretty big sequence here. But we've got temporal dilation on our side, so they can't really do much. But I'm on the eye out again for more projects, and hopefully I can find something cool for you guys. I didn't cover Doom at the start of this year because I wanted to wait for the DLC, and I wanted to wait for the ads on YouTube to turn from, you know, post N-word PewDiePie garbage back into post N-word PewDiePie half decent at best. So I was going to wait until the DLC came out, and then I had problems even getting the DLC and then getting the DLC to run, which was kind of a nightmare. So if you're wondering where Doom Eternal Ancient Gods Part 2 is, it's purely because all of my plans failed. But what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to buy the deluxe edition on Steam, I think, because I want to do the randomizer and I want to do the mods because they look amazing. And I'm going to cover the game on Nightmare, I'm going to cover both DLCs on Nightmare, and then I'm going to do every level in the main game on a master level, because on the PC, people have already modded in master levels, so every stage of the game now has a master level, and I'm going to try and do those on Nightmare as well. And hopefully it should be really fun, because Doom Eternal is a super fun game, and it's a pretty fun game to watch as well. And it isn't that long either, so it shouldn't be a huge tirade. But it's definitely going to be brutal. And now we have the RLS-7, which is the rocket launcher of this game. And we have it because we have a lot of these Seeker arachnids to kill. So I'm just going to be hitting this dude and sidestepping the quintessential video games right now, and there he goes. There's a little moment coming up where there's a bridge full of those spiders attacking soldiers, and the spiders seemingly keep on coming. I killed like 10 of them, and it didn't make any difference because I'm supposed to go and touch an elevator. So I ended up trimming that bit out of the video because I was shooting them for about 20 minutes, and it was actually really funny because I was just nuking them with a rocket launcher because there was so many rocket refills. But then I realised it had absolutely no bearing on what you're supposed to do, and there's no point in putting it in the guide because it was kind of pointless. But if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to see... Oh my god, look at this. Is this the worst thing ever? You turn a corner with a fucking rocket launcher not expecting anything, and there's one dude with a shotgun that chunks all your HP, and I'm surprised I didn't die just then. That was appalling. That was terrible play. Is there a stim pack over here? I feel like I've got my mind set on a stim pack, but I don't think it's there. Mistakes were made, ladies and gentlemen. Should have just restarted, but... Something I've not mentioned here, guys, is as much as this game is generous with checkpoints on certain segments, it's also kind of bad for them too. There are a few sequences where you don't get a checkpoint at the start of fights, so you have to sit and wait for characters to talk, and then open a door for you, and then you run forward and the fight happens, and then if you restart because it's not going very well, even though you didn't die, you have to watch the whole dialogue again. So what ended up happening is I didn't really want to keep restarting because I didn't trust that the game was going to give me appropriate checkpoints. And that's the only thing I'd change about the checkpoints in this game. Make them happen just before conflict. Don't make them happen before some narrative scripting event that's needless. He's bad, by the way. That's me backing up and dropping the gun. And right there, do you see that, guys? That is a spike shot on this lift. It's almost like the spike shot only turns up when you have to sit on one of these like aerial gondola things. And this is the bridge where I shot at the Seeker creatures for several minutes. And they just keep on coming. There's loads of them. It's just this weird scripted to make it look more interesting than it is. But look at the game right now. Look at the horizon here. Look how brown this is, dude. This filter that they have on here, this like diarrhea sepia that's happening, this was every single first-person shooter for a period of about 5 years. And it's ironic as well, because when you go back to something like Quake pretty much invented brown shooters, didn't it? Because it was trying to be as different to Doom as it physically could be, so it went more earthy, it went more grounded. And I actually really, really like Quake, and I like its aesthetic, I think it suits it. But you can't argue that it's not a very brown and grey game. And then you realise that people started seeing that as an aesthetic that they wanted to add grit to their shooters, and then every bloody shooter had it. Yeah, and if you didn't realise, guys, the reason why these moments are tricky when you're on these machines is they blow the cover away, and then they can hit you for free. So I just sat in this corner and didn't mess with any of it. I was actually tempted to skip this in editing and just remove this sequence, but I feel like it's important to show people that this is all I did. You know, I didn't mess around shooting stuff. I'm obviously quite antsy. I want to get on with the game. But you don't have to engage in any of that. It's all very scripted. And then we can push on now towards the final part of the game. Which, as far as challenging sequences go, except for a really dogshit checkpoint when you open that final big door, there's nothing really too bad stopping you from the end of the game now. And the only reason that shitty checkpoint is noticeable is because there's a sequence where a guy throws a grenade at you in a scripted moment, and I wasn't paying attention because I was listening to DSP play Ghouls and Goblins Resurrection and laughing at him. So I was running forward trying to get on with it, and I ended up running onto a pre-cooked grenade that they throw to kind of like slow the pacing down or something. and I just got killed by it. And I was really confused. And then the checkpoint put me back like 5 whole minutes, and I didn't understand it. Because to me it just seems so bloody senseless, especially when you die to scripting. I don't mind dying because I get aggressive and I don't pay attention. I should die for that. But when I die because your game throws a grenade somewhere to try and make it more interesting, it pissed me off, I'll tell you that. But keep on pushing forward. And then we move into the centre of this area, which is where all the fun stuff happens. So we need to charge the E99 bomb. Element 99. This person talking right now, Borisov, I'm almost certain he plays the SAS guy in the Rambo movie. He sounds like that guy. He's an Englishman, isn't he? He's called McTavish. Graham McTavish, I think his name is. He's like bald guy with gruff beard. And in that movie, you know, he's like, he's the boatman. He stays with the fucking boat. Or wherever it is. He's been like overly English. I think he might be Scottish, actually. But you know what I mean, he's British. I'll say British, it's easier, isn't it? Then if you're wrong, you kind of give yourself an out. But I think he's a Scottish guy. But I'm almost certain it's him putting on a Russian accent. I haven't Googled it, but there's just times, just then when I heard it, I can see him doing it, you know? It's one of those weird, like, sound recognition things that the brain does where you just, like, you're so certain it's somebody. And usually when that happens, they're absolutely spot on and correct. There are a few times when that happens where I'm wrong normally. I've got pretty good recognition for that stuff. This might be one of those times when I am wrong, who knows? But it's usually something pretty noticeable when you are wrong. But this is the door, guys. This is where the dog shit checkpoint is. It's one of these big doors coming up. Because there's a bunch of people to shoot as well. It's gone from the scripting of building tension for the E99 bomb, and now we're moving into the corridor shooter. And this is a really fun segment as well, minus, you know, if you get cheesed, like I bloody did. But you come into this room, grab the stuff you need to grab, and then a bunch of guys see you and they make a big fuss. That guy looks really interesting. Looks a bit like Ant-Man, doesn't he? Ant-Man if he wore a weird white costume. And then you'll notice the door directly in front of us now opens up and a bunch of guys turn our way. And this door's going to really slowly open. So it can build some of that tension. And now we're just going to go ham with the big gun. See you later, friends. Look how good the ice is as well. The cryo's so strong. And we just... See, this is where the autocannon does not do so well. In this range, the bullets can oftentimes not even go remotely close to where they need to. And if you take a few bullets here, it's because you didn't get a bullet on the enemy to stun them. And if you don't get a stun, they'll just light you up. But luckily, it's not too bad. I do think that this game could have had a unique difficulty name and a unique difficulty, because hard mode is... It can be very difficult if you make it difficult, but fundamentally it's pretty standard, it's pretty fine. And it's fine on both systems, because I've beat it on console and on PC now. And it's actually pretty cool that, coming back and playing games that you played on controller, and playing them on mouse and keyboard and seeing the difference and seeing how you feel about it. There are certain games that are definitely easier on controller, and then there are other games that are just night and day easier on mouse and keyboard. This gun is so good. You gotta be careful here though, I did die in this room. Because there's a lot of people, and all it takes is for them to hit you a few times, and you're dead. But the autocannon usually, if you get that first hit, it'll save you. Let's have a look. Anybody left? Nope. More bullets, more med packs, more blackboards that you can age. I watched a video the other day on YouTube about blackboards. It was the weirdest thing I've watched in a while. Like, did you know that there are mathematicians and math teachers who stockpile this very specific type of chalk? So it turns out there is this manufacturer in Japan that designed the best chalk in the world. I know, right? I'm not surprised. And apparently this chalk is so high quality that when you use it, it feels awesome. It's like the best chalk to write with. It's the best chalk to wipe away. Like, this chalk is the biggest Godzilla dick of all the chalks that could ever be. And what ended up happening is these teachers were finding out about it, and then other teachers were finding out about it, and then they were buying it, ordering it in bulk, and then like selling it to other teachers, and there was this whole like weird chalk racket going on. And now the company that makes it's actually gone bust. I don't know why, I don't really know the detail, but they've gone out of business, so they don't make it anymore. So these teachers have like bought in bulk. One of these guys bought over 10 years worth of chalk because he loved it so much. So if he rations himself, he's going to be fine. But they're all talking on this video and kind of lamenting that this company's not around anymore and that they're going to eventually run out of this awesome chalk. And I'm just sitting there and thinking, A, I kind of want to use this chalk now. The perfect advertisement for a dead company. But B, like, isn't it crazy when you get exposed to something that just is awesome performance, feels awesome, feels amazing, makes you feel like super sick. This is the grenade, by the way. This is the pre-grenade that they throw at you for some reason. That's the one that killed me and sent me back the whole section you just watched and pissed me off. But like, I couldn't imagine caring that much about chalk. But then just look at what I'm doing right now. Talking about game design, talking about aspects of video games and where we want them to go, talking about being able to measure my sensitivity to the approximate centimetre and the inch, understanding all of these wonderful facets and crazy features of the gaming culture and thus this video game landscape. Like, is being really into a specific sexy piece of chalk or brand of chalk any different than what I've essentially committed my life to doing? And it isn't, you know. It's the pursuit of something awesome that you love but not everyone understands. And I just thought it was a really, really interesting video. And yeah, I think it was a great advertisement. You know, if anybody goes into business and decides to make that chalk and like buy the license for that chalk and create it, I feel like you'll make some decent money with it, because there was a lot of people that were dead into it. And I used to mess around with chalk when I was a kid. That shit was godlike. Drawing on bricks with chalk, drawing on pavement with chalk, drawing on anything with chalk, you know? And then the rain just wipes it all away. It was like the ultimate playground. But here we go, guys, moving into the end game. As we can see, the reactor is overgrown and it's all crazy, and it's got the strange spectral, like, ghostly wreaths that are happening there. And now we get to move forward with the autocannon and just cause havoc. And there is Borisov once again. But I haven't talked about the story in this game, mostly because I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't played it. I kind of appreciate the story in this game, and it reminds me of a movie that I didn't like so much. But in this game, I felt like it was kind of interesting. But here we go with the elevators as we push towards. Like, look at the sense of climax here and building. The reactor now is really sending everything into this spiral of, this is the end of the game. Look at it, like, the game is escalating right now. And we have a new mechanic too of it rebuilding these cover with the Singularity waving through here and reconstructing it. It's an interesting way of doing cover, and it just happened there in that small instance. They could have made a whole sequence around that, you know? There's so much creativity in this game, and you wouldn't think it looking at it too. I think that's the reason why I'm so happy to be covering this finally. And people are going to watch this and think, oh my god, Chris thinks this is the best game in the world. And that is obviously not true. But I appreciate when I can see the passion, you know, when I can see the love. And here we go again. We haven't seen this guy in ages. The crazy teleporting around man that you have to freeze. And this room's actually trickier than the other one. But once again, if you do this correctly, you can pretty much dominate this dude. But just freeze him, shoot him, and hope you don't get put into an awkward situation like that. Like, I don't know what the strongest gun in this game is. You could probably keep it for this very particular part, and then just hit him with everything you've got. But did you notice what just happened then? I feel like when you freeze him, that was really interesting, and I'm glad I kept that in, because it shows you some programming going on then. I feel like when you freeze that enemy, you're allowed to do a certain amount of damage before he defreezes. And just then, when I used the auto gun cannon, he defrosted instantly. Did you see that? Think about the other time when I shot him in the face with the Kazanov. I was able to get 5 or 6 shots on him, whereas that, I shot him for maybe half, like 20 frames, and he immediately came out of it and died. So that leads me to believe that this gun is incredibly strong, on him especially, and that they've done that so it gives him an opportunity to maybe get out of it, but unfortunately for him he couldn't. And there is a factor in that we're not thinking about, or I'm not thinking about, which is when I shoot him with a sniper rifle, I'm using time dilation, so it gives me more time to hit him. But even when you don't, he stays frozen for a decent amount of time, and just then he recovered immediately. So the only thing I can think of is that he has some kind of programming to try and make him evade, to try and keep him alive. Because if you just froze him once and absolutely dumpstered him and he couldn't do anything, it wouldn't even be a fight. They want it to be almost a scripted dance of dodging, freezing, hitting, dodging, freezing, hitting. And you absolutely don't have to do that. Not if you use the right tools. But here we go. Another huge door here, guys. And we push forward. But the project after this one, for the people that are wondering, I'm being intentionally vague if you're wondering. It's a really interesting run. A really interesting run. It's going to give me opportunities to talk about a lot of stuff too. Because I'm playing the game in a way it's not really been designed to be played. And I'm intentionally not using one of the most fun mechanics. But at the same time, it led to something really unique. But the problem is, the start of the game is way more fun than the end. Because at the start of the game, you've got a gun that's got good visibility. So it makes it easier for target acquisition. Later on, you have to upgrade your gun to a gun that doesn't have as good visibility, which makes it harder to play. And the enemies themselves get beefier. So at the start, the enemies take the right amount of damage that makes it doable, still challenging and still fun. And then later on, towards the end of the game, it's just a fucking nightmare. Because they're so beefy, and the problem with the game is, while you shoot them, they're shooting you. So in this game, when I shoot people and they stagger around and they don't fire back and I can just body them, it's super powerful, right? Well, in that game, as you're hitting them, if they're landing stray shots, and those stray shots kill you really quickly. And that game really doesn't fuck about with damage too. So if a guy has a shotgun, even if he's 4 meters away from you, he will kill you when you have full armor and full life. He'll just put you down. So it's a really, really interesting run, and I hope you guys can enjoy it, because it was just like a random idea I had. I started doing it. I thought it was going to be throwaway, and then it turns out it's a lot harder than I thought. But I did have a ton of fun up until about the last third of the game, and then I really wanted it to end, because it was getting a bit annoying. And it's just because everything gets cheap hits on you when you're trying to kill them. So eventually you're going to lose that war of attrition. Whereas in this game, they do get cheap hits on you sometimes, but fundamentally you're okay. And in this game, when you restart, it fills your life. In the other game that you're going to be seeing, it doesn't do that. So you get put into some pretty rough situations. But at the end of the day, it makes it more interesting to watch. So as long as you folks who have sat with me for the last 3 hours, as long as you find it entertaining and you enjoy the struggle, then it's all been worth it. And that's kind of the point, isn't it, you know? At this moment in time, I can't capture people's imagination with the lowest common denominator YouTube content. I can't do that. I can't make part 1 of every new game that comes out with absolutely no hope and no faith of ever continuing those playthroughs unless they go really, really well. That's just not who I am. When I start things on my channel, I like to finish them, and I feel really disingenuous if I were to be that kind of YouTuber that you have to be now, where you just completely bombard everybody with part 1 and make every cutscene into a movie. You know the type of content that you have to make nowadays, where you show off all the final bosses the day the game comes out with horrible spoiler thumbnails and a million clicks. Like I've never wanted to be a channel like that, even though I've done things like that when I thought they were cool. but it's always been in the pursuit of me wanting to support the game and thinking it was cool. And I thought about that the other day. Like, even the games where I did collectibles, or I showcased weapons, or I showcased cool things and cool features and made a lot of videos, and those videos perhaps did quite well, I always did it from the perspective of, this is an awesome game that I want to share with you, and I never did it to games that I didn't like, and I could have easily have done that, you know? A great example of that is Nier Automata. I really wanted to like that game, and before it came out, I had huge plans with covering the game to show everything and do all kinds of crazy things, and in the end I made a playthrough where I hated the entire game the whole time I was playing it. I made a walkthrough that I didn't want to make because I still hated the game, and I just kind of did it because I was in that routine of doing it. And then I made a video where I showed the main character's ass for 2 minutes, and that one video of me showing her ass performed better than every single other video that I made on that game combined. And even the obligatory stuff I tried to do, where I showcased maybe the blacksmith or any kind of sundry video where you might find something to try and help people not have to suffer that horrible video game, even those, like, I barely did them to the degree I should have done. And if I was a smarter YouTuber and somebody more focused, I would have hawed the shit out of Nier because it was easy views. But it's not who I am, and it's not who I want to be. And I know it sounds stupid, and I know it's not the path to success, but it's the path I'm on, and it's the path I believe in. And if you're still here watching, thank you for listening this long, thank you for watching, and thank you for sticking in there and supporting my channel when not many people do. But look at this too, look how cool this is. It's swapping between the time zones and it's unfreezing all these frozen people and they're all enemies. So you're moving into a firefight that's suspended in time, and then the event is happening and boom, the timeline shifts and you're in the middle of it. It's just such a unique and interesting moment, and they're throwing it at us in the last 5 minutes of the game, and you'll never see this again. They could have made a whole game with this mechanic, you know? And that's kind of the joy of Singularity. It is a game full of other games. It really is. Then you have games coming out where they have one mechanic and they never flesh it out and it's fucking boring and the whole game is boring, and they thought one boring mechanic that wasn't really developed was going to carry their whole experience. This is the complete opposite of that. You know, that right there is just the ultimate sin of a video game. This here, if anything, I think they might have sold themselves a bit short here, because they could have done so much more with what they had, and they took the time and the money to make all of this, and then they only used it sparingly in a beautifully graceful way. And it appeals a lot to somebody like me. I quite like the chromatic aberration here. Super cranked up, but it looked awesome. But what they've done there, if anything comes of this video, I want that to be the thing that comes from it, to the developers to realise that those little moments where you spent probably far too long working on something very small, it did not go underappreciated. Look at this, by the way. Minigun man, plenty of enemies, and I'm one hit away from death. Like, if this was that other game I'm talking about that's going to be next, I'm already dead. You can't do this in that other game. This right here is RNG spread, and the CPU aren't complete gods. This is fair. I had a lot of fun with this too. I recorded this entire walkthrough in, I think it was about 4 hours. It was awesome. And then it took me 2 hours to edit. So if you think about that, that's crazy, isn't it? How long did I play it for? Like 3 or 4 hours? 5 hours maybe? We'll say 5 just for, you know, so it doesn't seem too crazy. And then 2 hours to edit, which is 7. And then this is going to take 3, so I made a walkthrough in 10 hours. That is insane. That is crazy. Especially considering that there's a lot of snipping here and a lot of tweaking. A lot of the stuff that will go unnoticed, but an entire walkthrough with, on the hardest difficulty, with full commentary, with several stipulations and restrictions, in 10 hours, that might be a new record for me, that. I don't think I've ever done that before, which is really, really awesome and really inspiring. But keep on moving forward, guys. We're going to go through a few sequences where we go near the middle of this and it swaps between realities. And then we get to nuke some people with some autocannon slow-mo. See the difference? Right there? Between my aim on that moment and on that door moment. My aim right there looked actually okay. That was quite nice. And the aim in this game does not feel good at all. It's really awkward to use at first, but you do get used to it. And there is a lot of benefit in learning odd sensitivities, because it means that you can adjust to any sensitivity. And I think that's one of the things that's... one of the reasons why I don't regret playing at 4000 DPI like a moron, is because it helped me adjust to other sensors, and it made me more adaptable, more modular, which is useful. But you can hear the bullets here, so there's more guys. Oh, wow, he hit me hard. What a beast. That guy's a hero. And now we have a heavy who's going to kill me instantly if he tags me here. But he didn't shoot me, which is really lucky. And then that guy gets wrecked. But what a fun game. They don't make them like they used to, guys. And I've been looking for something like this to play recently. I even like the reload animations. There's some really nice animations here. Raven have got some solid chops, and I hope they go on to make their own games again. I don't want them to just be a dedicated COD developer, sorry. As much as they're good at that and they'll make fine games, I think the only thing COD will do for them, other than giving them a really good budget, potentially, is they'll stifle them with having it to be a formulaic Call of Duty roller coaster. And at some point, you need more than just a Michael Bay roller coaster, you know? You want something like this. And this is the first time I've hit the augmenter by accident, and that's why it gave me that tutorial on how to upgrade my abilities, because I've never done it, guys. For the people who are like, oh, he's cheating, he's upgrading his guns and his abilities, he's just lying. Well, you can believe that if you want to believe that. I'll just believe that you're infertile and never spread your horrible genetic code. But here we go, straight through the door. We've stimmed up, we've got good HP. Last few dudes now. Wreck 'em, shoot 'em. Get your checkpoints, bust them out of that corporeal veil. Well, I should say, bust them from that spectral veil into the corporeal veil. And make sure you've always got a loaded gun just in case. So, run into the middle. No transition. We can go straight forward now. There's a checkpoint, a couple more of the Zeks. Bust them back, there's an explosive. Didn't affect his buddies though, did it? Where did he pull those from? There must be a warehouse where they all go to when they're in that weird alternate plane where there's just infinite red barrels. Can you imagine that? You like flick a cigarette, nuke the world. And then here we go. This is going to lead us to the interesting conclusion of Singularity. Which there's a really odd choice coming up here. As you wait for all this stuff to happen. Your Ghostbuster laser the core. So, I don't know how to feel about the idea of when you kill one evil, another evil replaces the void that is left behind. I don't know how to feel about that logic. Of course, there's a lot of social sciences that show us that, you know, when you depose one king or one tyrant, there is usually another rather eager and guileful tyrant willing to take his place and slide into the DMs and get his own little kingdom cracking. But I wonder if it's just us as a player. Did we get played this whole game, do you think? Did we not realise? Did we force our own belief system that we're on the side of good, fighting evil, and that the person that we were saving was the morally good person? Is it just one of those allegories on how power corrupts? I don't know. But keep on zapping the core. Now you've got your super powerful impulse, which you barely saw me use because there's no point to doing it. All it does is get you killed. And then here we go, ladies and gentlemen, the start of the game, where we save Demichev. Thank you so much for watching. You take care now.